I am now sitting with the first tenured woman of psychology in Harvard.
The mother of mindfulness, Dr. Ellen Langer.
Harvard psychology professor Ellen Langer showed that mental attitude can reverse the effects of aging.
The author of more than 200 research articles on human behavior. She has written 13 books, including Mindfulness, On Becoming an Artist, and Counterclockwise.
From a very early age, there'd be some little friend who is suffering from whatever little kids suffer from. I would step in and try to show her another way of looking at it, and sort of became who I am, what I did.
This book, The Mindful Body.
The Mindful Body started off as a memoir. I believe that stress is the major source of our illness, over and above diet, genetics, even treatment. Decades ago, they didn't believe that psychology mattered at all. I made myself sick. My mother made herself well. This sowed the seeds for what was eventually going to be my mind-body unity theory. Since we're little kids, everything is conspiring against us. You're taught right and wrong as if these are completely different. This massive misunderstanding where people think they want complete success, not knowing that if they had complete success, life would be empty. And the problem is that we're all taught absolutes that we think are unchanging. When you're mindful, you have choices. When you're mindless, you don't. Everything looks different from different perspectives. Uncertainty is the rule, not the exception. And you don't have to feel bad about not knowing because nobody knows.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Mislaibeled. If you're watching this, and you can please like, subscribe, and comment, that would mean the world, specifically a subscription, as that very much helps the algorithm. We are putting in a lot of work, as you can see. The episode you're about to watch was shot this past week in Boston with the great Dr. Ellen Langer. Dr. Langer is the first female professor of psychology to be tenured at Harvard. She's been teaching there for over 40 years. She has 3 Distinguished Scientist Awards and was awarded the Liberty Genius Science Award, has authored 13 plus books, and has written hundreds and hundreds of articles. Her most recent book, The Mindful Body, is incredible. I personally read it, off the hook amazing. She's commonly known as the mother of mindfulness and psychology, learned a host of new things, has given me a tremendously new outlook on life and the way I've seen different scenarios. Highly recommend everyone to watch this. Really helpful in going through difficult times, repositioning, reframing, re-seeing your life in positive ways that can really help you. So I encourage everyone to tune into this one. I'm going to drop the episode right now. It is a must-watch. I hope you all enjoy. So I want to just start, though, a little bit from the beginning, because there's a lot of people watching this that probably don't know who you are.
No.
So it is definitely possible that they don't, because my audience is not necessarily the school type, and, you know. So either way, I want to start off. Where did you grow up?
I haven't.
You haven't?
No, in New York.
Where in New
I
York?
was born in the Bronx and moved when I was very young to Westchester, Yonkers.
I had read somewhere that you were born in Brooklyn. False.
No.
Fake news.
Yeah.
Totally fake news. Got it. You grew up in a Jewish home, correct?
Yes, I did.
How would you say that growing up in a Jewish home contributed, I should say, towards your work that you're doing now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, people don't realize you only grow up in one place. So you don't have a basis of comparison. So you don't know if anything you're doing would have been different if it weren't a Jewish home, for example. My parents were not religious. We would go to temple on the holidays. And I remember I'd be dressed in something brand new and basically sitting outside, so I didn't have a very extensive Jewish education, but have always felt very Jewish in a non-religious way. And, and I actually, that I had a dear friend when she was at Harvard who was very religious. And for the time she was at Harvard, then I too was religious.
Really?
But I mean, only meaning that I actually knew when the different holidays were taking place.
Got it. That's very cool. We have a big one coming up now, actually.
Yeah, I know that.
So that's exciting. And you told me you're giving me a gift after we leave.
That's right.
So I'm excited for this. We'll call it a Hanukkah gift. You're referred to, commonly as the mother of mindfulness. Mm-hmm. You talk about how your mother was a big catalyst
Yeah.
for how you got started on this journey.
Yeah.
What specifically
Well,
happened?
there are several things about that. The first is, and I don't know if this was typical of a Jewish household, but I grew up with enormously supportive parents. I think my mother would have had me laminated if she could have, and so I was happy. And I certainly was not the only child that I spent time with that was happy, but I seemed to be happier. And so from a very early age, there'd be some little friend who is suffering from whatever little kids suffer from, and I would step in and try to show her another way of looking at it, and this sort of became who I am, what I did. But the more important part relevant to the mindful body is my mother's episode with cancer. And this is interesting. There were two. First of all, the mindful body started off as a memoir. So there are lots of very personal stories in it. And there were two stories that I'll share with you now, one about my mother and one about a marriage that I had, that in some sense sowed the seeds for lots of the theory that I was going to study and do experiments regarding for the last several decades. So let me start with the one not about my mother. So I was secretly married when I was obscenely young. And we went to Paris on our honeymoon. And my ex-husband, was much more sophisticated than I. That's relevant to the story because we were out to dinner and I ordered the mixed grill. One of the items on the mixed grill was a pancreas. Gene, which of these is the pancreas? He pointed to it. I ate everything else, and this is probably Jewish. I'm a big eater. And now I eat everything on the plate. Now I eat the pancreas, and I start getting sick, literally. He starts laughing. This was not appropriate for newlyweds. Yeah. And I said, why are you laughing? And he was laughing because I was getting sick eating chicken. I had eaten the pancreas a long time ago and didn't realize it. So I had made myself sick. Now, and I've said this on other podcasts, I'm probably the only person who has two pancreas stories. So now the story with my mother. My mother had breast cancer, and the cancer had metastasized to her pancreas, and that's the end game, right? Yes. The medical world just wrote her off. She was no longer getting any exercise or anything else that would be important, but not for someone who is very close to dying. And then magically it was gone. And the medical world couldn't explain it. So here I made myself sick, my mother made herself well. And this sowed the seeds for what was eventually going to be my mind-body unity theory, which is very simple. We talk mind and body, they're just words. And the problem by having a mind and a body is how do you get from the mind, something fuzzy, to the body, something material? Nobody can explain that. I thought, well, okay, let's not bother with explanations. They're just words again. Let's put the two together. And if we make the mind and body a single unit, then wherever you put the mind, you're necessarily putting the body, which gives us enormous control over our health and also our well-being. And many of the studies, all of the studies to date, are reported in the mindful body, which goes beyond mind-body unity. But an example of one, the first one we did is called the counterclockwise study. And I'm happy to tell you, this is a famous study. It's not obnoxious to call my own study famous because if you watch The Simpsons Go to Havana, they actually talk about the study. So you know you've made it when The Simpsons won't talk about it.
I also know I've made it. I'm sitting here with you. So
that's okay. There you go.
I definitely feel like that's
right.
I'm going to run back to all my friends who are Harvard graduates and be like, listen, I never went to Harvard or any top college.
But you have.
With a tenor at Harvard,
Anyway, all right. So the study, what we did was we retrofitted a retreat to 20 years earlier, and we had elderly men. These are men around 80, but that was when 80 was 80, not the new 60.
Right.
They were old. Lived there for a week as if they were their younger selves. So they would speak about past events as if they were just unfolding. They watched movies from the past, talked about current events, Castro, Gorbachev, whatever, as if it was just taking place. Just in a little less than a week, we found their vision improved, their hearing improved, their memory, their strength, and they look noticeably younger without any medical intervention. And to this day, now this was done many decades ago, and still to this day, I have not heard of hearing in an elderly person's, for an elderly person improving without medical intervention.
Yeah.
Right? So we put the mind back. Now, and some people have taken issue with it. They say, you can't make people younger. I'm not turning the clock back in any literal way. But so much of what these people, what all of us think we can't do, we don't have evidence that in fact, science can never show that something can't be. What you can do is try something, and if it doesn't work, okay, so that isn't possible. But you can't show that there's no possible answer to whatever the question is.
So just my only question, obviously this concept of mindfulness, it ties into a lot of different aspects, right? There's probably like 5 to 7 core themes that, from what I've read that you really, tie into mindfulness and how mindfulness affects things. But for people watching this, and I know this is what I thought originally, was that mindfulness was like meditation.
Yeah.
So could you just explain what mindfulness is?
But then we should get back to the mind-body unit.
Yes, for sure.
Because that's, okay. All right. So mindfulness is the very simple process of actively noticing new things. Now, when you think you know, you don't notice anything because why bother looking? You already know. And the bottom line is that uncertainty is the rule, not the exception. Everything is changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives, so you can't know, all right? And once you realize that, you came to my house. This is the first time you've been here. You didn't have to meditate. You didn't have to practice. You didn't have to do anything. You walked in. It was all new. You notice the books and you say, look what she's reading. It's a painting. Did she do that painting? What is that thing over there?
It's a beautiful house.
Thank you. Everything is new.
Yeah.
So there are really 2 ways to become mindful. One is top down. I'll explain what this means in a moment. The other is bottom up. So the top down is really once you accept you don't know, and you don't feel bad about not knowing, because nobody knows. Nobody can know for sure. So you don't know, everything is new. Bottom up is to take things that you think you know and notice new things about them. So walk outside and notice 3 new things. And be surprised because you're walking outside every single day of, as long as you've lived wherever you are. The person you live with, if you live with anybody, or a close friend, or somebody at work, notice 3 new things about them. And things come alive again.
So and when you do that
when you do that often enough, you see, you just don't know as often as you do. Now, I start lots of lectures on this by asking people to answer a question that everybody thinks they know. So let me ask you, and half of the people who are listening to us have probably heard this, which is fine, but the other half haven't. How much is 1 + 1?
2.
Okay. Now, it is the case that there are times 1 + 1 is 2, but 1 + 1 is not always 2. 1 + 1 is 2 if you're using a base 10 number system. If you're using a base 2 number system, 1 + 1 is written as 10. Now, nobody cares about number systems, so let's get down to it. If you take 1 pile of laundry and you add 1 pile of laundry, 1 + 1 is 1. You take 1 wad of chewing gum, you add 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 + 1 is 1. You take 1 drop of water, you add 1 drop of water, 1 + 1 is 1. The most recent one that somebody sent to me was you take 1 pizza and you add 1 pizza, you have 2 pizzas, 1 and 1 is 2. But if you take 1 lasagna and you add 1 lasagna, 1 + 1 is 1. It's just a bigger lasagna.
Right.
So the point is, in the real world, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, as or more often as it does. Now, so who cares? Well, here's the point. Now that you know that you didn't know before, you have choices. Somebody says to you, Mislaibeled, how much is 1 + 1? You say, wait a second, let me see. Let me look at the context. Right. It can be 1, it can be 2, it can be 10, and perhaps there are other answers as well. So when you're mindful, you have choices. When you're mindless, you don't. And, when you ask people, I gave a talk the other day to the World Happiness Fest. And so I was focused on happiness and raised the question that I was surprised I hadn't thought to say this 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But can robots be happy? No, it doesn't make any sense. Well, when we're mindless, we're like robots. We're not there. And also, as I'm fond of saying, when you're not there to know you're not there. And almost 50 years of research has shown me that virtually all of us are not there almost all of the time.
Right.
And you want to be there. Now, meditation is a practice you engage in to result in post-meditative mindfulness. Okay, so when you're meditating, you're leading up to something. It's a practice. Mindfulness, as we study it, is not a practice. It's a way of being that follows from an appreciation of uncertainty.
So going back to the mind-body connection,
It's not a connection. So it's interesting. So I've been talking about mind-body unity since 79 or so. 1970, a long time. And at that point, most people were just talking about mind-body dualism. And then, perhaps I had some influence on it. One never knows these things. Then all of a sudden, people start talking about connection. But you're talking about connection, you have the same problem. How are they connected? How is a thought, something immaterial, connected to the body, something material? So I want to talk about unity because then the power that we have over our health and well-being becomes much more apparent. If it's one thing, you and your body, you and your soul, any way you want to understand yourself is all just you. You can accomplish things that most of us wouldn't even consider possible.
Right. How would the way you see mindfulness intersect with the mind-body unity component?
Okay. That's actually a very good question.
They appear to be two different things. That's why.
Right. Mindfulness I did in the past, and now I'm talking about mind-body unit. No, I'm joking. We have one thing, the mind and body. It's a single unit. That single unit can be mindless or mindful. When you're mindful, the neurons are firing, and all of our research shows that it's literally and figuratively enlivening. When you're being mindless, the body, the mind is shutting down, turning off, dying.
All right, everybody, I want to take a quick second to give a big shout out to our sponsor for this episode, CubX. CubX is, as far as I'm concerned, the #1 IT provider for businesses, whether that be big or small, real estate, healthcare, finance, e-commerce, apparel. It does not matter. These guys have it on lock. I know this because I personally use them, and I've referred these guys to probably 10 different friends of mine who are all running both small or large businesses, and they've all come back to me and have given me rave reviews about these guys and thanked me profusely for sending them their way. So if you want to get ahead and focus on the things that make you money and not be busy for hours when a tech issue comes up, give these guys a call. They have changed the game and most importantly have changed the IT experience for those who use them. Their customer support is off the charts. I can personally attest to this. One ring, they pick up, and you're dealing with an experienced tech who knows what's up. Feel free to test it. If you're starting a new company or are unhappy with your current IT provider and are looking for the best product out there, take it from me. This is a no-brainer choice. Give these guys a call. You can reach them at 732-444-8771 and choose sales when following the prompts. Or you can reach out via email at hello@cubx.com. That's HELLO@CUBX.com. You can also check them out at cubx.com. That's CUBX.com. Now back to our episode. How would you tell someone, it a little bit feels, and I know I'm sure people have asked you this, that being mindful, let's say someone like me, I would definitely quantify myself as someone that is totally mindless.
You would. Most people think they're mindful.
No, I'm an honest person. I'm definitely mindless. I'm self-aware. Given that we could just talk about me, okay, it feels like it would be exhausting. Okay, I understand. Yeah,
I've been asked this before, and it keeps coming up. When you're happy, when you're engaged, the only way you can be engaged is to be mindful. The engagement is a function of noticing. When you think you know, you're not happy. We find that being mindful, this act of noticing, is energy begetting, not consuming. When you're happy, you have more energy. When you're depressed, you sort of turn the world off. It's interesting because people think that you should be mindless some of the time. because so many people are. Maybe there's an advantage, and I argue strongly against this. I think that if you're going to show up, if you're going to do something, show up for it. Now, people think being mindless allows you, mindless of these things over here means I can attend to these things over here. All right. But the problem is that once you deal with something mindlessly, you can't return to it and see it anew. So in sports, let's say, or playing a musical instrument, people are taught, learn the basics so well that you don't have to think about them.
Right.
So now, they become second nature. And when you say that to yourself now, let a little bell go off in your head. They're telling you to be mindless. So there are several things about that. The first is, who decided what the basics are? Whose basics are there? If I were doing this in a large audience, I'd ask somebody very tall to join me on stage. And there's always somebody 6'5" there for some bizarre reason. He'd come up and, we look funny. I'm 5'3", he's 6'5". I'd ask him to put his hand up. I'd put my hand next to his. His hand is 3 inches larger than I. And I'd simply raise the question, should we do anything physical the same way? Now, if he wrote the rules for the basics, it's not going to serve me well. In fact, the more different you are from the person who wrote the rules, the more important it is for you not to mindlessly follow the rules. So you're learning some activity. It doesn't matter what it is. You learn how to, it doesn't matter, any sport, any musical instrument. Let's say you're learning it when you're 15 years old. You're locking yourself into how you're going to do it. Now, surely there are going to be things that more experience. Your body is going to be better suited for certain activities in 5 years. But you're still going to be doing it the way you did it when you first learned it. Once you do things mindlessly, you're freezing your behavior. So you never want to be mindless. But let me give you another example. And people think when you're mindless, you can do things quicker. And sometimes speed is of the essence. Well, I don't believe that being mindless is quicker than being mindful, but even if it is, it's only nanoseconds. So I use the example, you're at a park and you're watching a 3-year-old, all right? And now the 3-year-old wanders into the street. Shouldn't you just mindlessly grab that child so you can get her out of harm's way? And I say, no. First of all, if you were mindful, the child wouldn't have ended up in the street in the first place. Secondly, you want to be there because there's a lot of information to be obtained by looking at the person who's driving that car, even if only quickly. And if the driver is turning this way, you don't want to pull the child. You're not pulling them to safety by going in the direction the car is aiming. So, no, I feel very strongly about this, that there's no advantage to be mindless. Now, you might say, if everybody around you is mindless, isn't it better just to be like everybody else? No, because you can fake it if you want.
So you're saying there's no scenarios. The question is, when certain things become the assumed best way to do something, the question is who did choose that? Mm-hmm. But I think there are things that probably exist.
Well, no, but let me just cap it by saying the only time you should be mindless, I believe, is if you found the best way of doing something and nothing changes. And I don't know how you
mean by nothing changes. What do you mean by
that? There's no new information. That everything is exactly the same, which of course it's never going to be. And how can you ever be sure you found the best way? And what does it mean, the best way? If you hold a tennis racket a certain way, and that's the way you've learned it, and you keep practicing that way, but then you don't sleep well and you hurt your arm, you shouldn't hold the racket the same way. If you're playing against a lefty, you should hold the racket slightly differently. If you're playing against a righty, you change the racket in very subtle ways, depending on whether you're going to slam the ball, or a lob.
Yeah.
And these things come with experience. And we have a notion that practice makes perfect, not the way most people practice. The way most people practice, where what they're trying to do is learn it so well that they don't have to think about it, that practice is making imperfect. If the practice is engaged each time to become more aware of the subtle ways everything is different, then that practice is going to be good.
And do you not lose bandwidth to be able to proceed with other greater things at a certain point?
No, you're not. To be mindful means to be open. It means mostly you can't attend to everything at the same time, if that's what you mean, of course. Yeah. But you don't want to ever think you know some part of it so well that you never go back to it.
Right. Okay. No, that you have to be
open. So essentially you want to be either mindful or potentially mindful. Right. You never want to be mindless, as far as I understand things. People confuse the certainty of their mindsets with the underlying phenomenon. Right. Things are changing, but they're holding them still. Now, we want certainty so we can have control, right? We can avoid the dangers, take care of, search for all the benefits and what have you. But by confusing the certainty, by presuming that things themselves are still, we actually are giving up the control. We do this with people, we do this with things, not just, the way you're going to swing the tennis racket. You figure, oh, he's a nice guy. Okay, whatever that means to you. Or this other person is not particularly nice. You freeze that understanding. Right. And what that means is that then you're examining hypotheses through a very narrow lens. And so if I am looking at you now as somebody, let's say you're wonderful. And let's make you not wonderful. What do you want? Not wonderful for the moment. There's a way that our hypotheses are almost always confirmed. So no matter how I see you, I'm going to find evidence for it. Now, what happens then is that by having this narrow view, I'm missing the fullness of you.
Other perspectives.
And the way in which that thing you did, so let's say because I don't like you, I see you as a snob, all right? And if I did like you, I could just as easily see you as shy in any particular circumstance. All right. So the main thing, I have a one-liner, predict today and lose tomorrow, which people can't decode quickly. But what I mean by that is that every prediction we make leads us to seek confirmation for that hypothesis, for that prediction. Right?
But do you not feel that that's
and then we don't see anything else? What?
In studies, do you not think that's the same thing? Like, let's say if you're doing a study based on something that you think is going to lead to a certain result because you're trying to test something. Would that not exist in any given study?
No, because in a study you're setting it up to give people an option to conform or not conform to what you're expecting. The point is that my example generator isn't working right now to give you an example of this, but people don't understand that prediction is an illusion. Right. People think they can predict. What am I saying? How can you not predict? Well, you can predict to the group, but you can't predict the individual behavior. So, for example, let's say, Michael Jordan and I are going to have a foul shooting contest, and we each shoot one basket. Now, can you predict with great certainty that he's going to win? You shouldn't, because on occasion he misses, and on occasion I make it. And he's a nice guy, I presume.
Is a prediction something that guarantees certainty, or is it based on odds?
No, what I'm saying, either way, you can predict. If you want to predict that he's going, you have to, if you're asked who's going to win, the correct answer should be who knows. Because we can generate many reasons why he might miss the shot, even if only because he's let the older woman win. We can't know with one basket. But if we were each shooting 100 baskets, certainly he'd win. Let me use a different example. Would you wager all of the money you own now and all your future earnings on this wager, where we're going to go to a Mercedes parking lot and you're going to randomly choose a car? Okay, hundreds of cars. You're going to randomly choose one, and we're going to start the car. If the car starts, I'll give you $1 million. If the car doesn't start, you give me all that you own now and all your future earnings. You'd be foolish to take the bet because there are always lemons. Even the best of us on occasion don't succeed. But if we were to start all the Mercedes cars, most of them are going to start right up. So group data is different from individual data. The bottom line, Leibel, is that all we really care about most of the time for most of us is What's it going to be like for me? You know, you're told the surgery is successful for 80% of the people. That's good, but should I have the surgery? Is it going to work for me? And nobody can tell you that. No doctor worth anything would say to you, yes, we're sure this is going to be successful. You go to take a test. If I took a psychology test, now I know a lot of psychology. I've been doing this for a long time. And if you were allowed, you know, if I were going to take the test, I would wager a lot of money that I'm going to get most of the answers right. But am I going to get every single answer? I wouldn't risk it.
So that's what I'm trying to understand, I guess, what prediction is, right? You're saying on an individual case.
You can't predict the individual case. You can predict the group, perhaps. And so when you're asking me about research, we're trying to predict the group. And this is very important in ways that go beyond our just going back.
Here's my only question. So I'm just trying to understand
Sure,
one thing.
yeah.
If you could predict off a group base, right, off a group, would that not lead me to, if I had to choose something in an individual setting, to at least choose the one that the group would win?
No, sure.
So the answer is you can't predict with certainty.
Yeah, you can't predict.
But that's with certainty.
No,
if
it
I had
doesn't.
a choice,
No,
if I
it
had a
makes
gun
no
to my
sense.
head.
You only have one option. You're only going to do it once.
Right, so which one would I choose, effectively? The one that has the best odds. It doesn't,
it has the best odds, but those odds still say, let's say 75% of the time it works. It means 25% of the time it doesn't. So you don't know in the individual case.
What would you choose in the individual case?
If you
had a gun to your head, choice.
It would depend on the circumstances. And I'm not suggesting that it's mindless to make the choice that would be true for the group. What I'm saying is it's mindless to presume that it's going to be successful. This is much deeper and more important than we've touched on so far, because virtually all of the facts that we have, one way or the other, would derive from science.
Right.
Science only gives us probabilities. There is no science, there's no experiment that gives you an absolute.
Right.
What science says, if we were to do the exact same study again, which you can never do exactly the same, we're likely to get the same findings. Those are translated, those probabilities are translated as absolute facts. Let me give an example. My life changed, and I've said this over and over again, and I'm just, it was such an important moment for me.
The horse story?
The horse story, right. I'm at this horse event. This man asked me, will I watch his horse for him because he wants to get his horse a hot dog. I'm the student you hated in school. I was the A++ student. It's hard for me. I mean, I'm trying not to look at him as if he's an idiot, but that's what I'm thinking. I was young. And sure, I'll watch your horse, knowing horses are herbivorous. They don't eat meat. He comes back with the horse, with the hot dog, rather, and the horse ate it. And that's when I realized everything I thought I knew could be wrong. Now, let's say, what is the science behind that? So you take horses, not all horses are the same. So the small horses, big horses, heavy horses, Clydesdales, foxtrotters, it depends on the kind of horse. Okay, so we take a group of horses, and then we're going to give them meat. But what meat are we giving them? How much meat? How much meat is... All of these things are knowable to the person who's doing the study.
A mistake.
But not to... Exactly, not to the person who's reading the research. Now what you're going to find is that most of the horses don't eat it. Now, it's much too complicated. Imagine if every time you were given a fact, you were told these kind of horses were given this kind of meat when the temperature outside was what, and they had this kind of exercise, and then most of them didn't eat the meat. It's too cumbersome. So instead, you're told horses don't eat meat. And that's 1 and 1 is 2. All of the absolutes we're given lead us to be mindless, which leads me to the belief that the major cause of our mindlessness is our education, schools, and then our parents who are telling us. I had this experience. Many of my ideas come from the strangest places, but I was at a friend's house for dinner, and the fork was on the right side of the plate. I felt like some natural law was being violated. And it was all I could do to move the fork to where it belonged. Now, I'm a thinking person most of the time. And so I said to myself, why do I care where the stupid
Yeah.
fork? I mean, I can generate a lot of reasons why it would be better for the fork to be on the right side of the plate.
Right.
Nevertheless,
Even
it
makes
felt,
more sense if you think about it.
Yeah,
'Cause-
exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're wearing something like this, and
Yeah.
you
Go over
won't
it, you
dip
get
it
it
in the right. And so then I thought, where did this come from? Now, I grew up in, as I told you, a lovely family, but we did not discuss philosophical issues about fork placement. In fact, we really didn't discuss philosophical issues about anything. They were just very loving people. All that happened was my mother said, the fork goes over here. Now, and that was a long time ago. And her just telling me the fork goes here in this absolute way means that 20, 30 years later, I'm feeling uncomfortable for the fork to be,
Well, someone probably told her also that the fork goes there.
Yeah. So the point is, the way we learn is people tell us these absolutes. These absolutes lead us not to do any further thinking and limit us enormously. So that's what, so if we were to change education, which I would like to, and have thought about mindful schools, there's so many things that would be different. The first thing is we would teach mindfully. What does that mean?
I have a great question, though, I need to ask before we go to this, if that's
all right,
okay.
But then you'll have to remind me. I'm older
fine.
and
I will
less
go back
likely to
this.
remember.
You talk a lot about how mindfulness is not going towards the future, not setting goals necessarily for the future and to live in the moment, right? How would you say to live still in an intention-based thinking life? Let's say regarding this particular example with the forks, but also not, live a thinking life towards the future.
Okay.
As far as
your question is much too complicated, because to arrive at the answer that you would like to get to, whatever thoughts are in your head now, mine is very simple. All we need to do is say the fork could go here. Some of us like to put the fork over here. You might want to consider putting the fork over there rather than the fork goes over here. 1 and 1 could be 2, not 1 and 1 is 2. Many horses don't eat meat. All right? And so what happens is you learn a place to put the fork. You learn an answer to how much is 1 and 1. You know something about horses, but you don't know it in the way that freezes future learning. You don't know it where you think, well, got that mastered.
This is definitive now.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because people who are wonderful at whatever they do, whether they're podcasters, professors, athletes, those who are the best are still learners.
Yeah.
Things are changing. You want to be there, and notice the changes so you could take advantage of them. When you're mindful, you can take advantage of opportunities to which other people are blind and avoid dangers before they arise. When you're mindless, you just go forward as a robot. And again, I go back to what I was saying before. If you realize you're behaving like a robot, and a robot's life, is that the life you want? It's not a life where you're excited, you're happy, you're engaged.
Yeah, I totally hear that. So regarding the mindful school, I know you've spoken about this.
Yeah, okay. So, the most important thing would be to teach conditionally. Instead of absolutes, it would be conditional. It could be, it would seem that, maybe, perhaps, one way of. Another is that, some of these ideas are very simple, but I think would have an enormous impact on students. Another would be, rather than ask for single answers, to ask for multiple answers, no matter what the question is. Just sort of imagine the classroom, the way teachers teach now. We use the simplest example, but this goes straight through to graduate school. If the teacher asks, how much is 1 + 1? And a little label says 1. The teacher looks at you askance. The other students now decide, you're one of these losers, so on and so forth. In the mindful classroom, the teacher would say, Liebel, how did you come up with that?
Right.
And then you'd say, you take 1 wad of chewing gum, we have 1 wad of chewing gum and 1 + 1. And everybody would learn something.
Yeah.
So let me just, an important part of all of this is that the world as it's now arranged is full of winners and losers.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something that happened not that long ago that to me, it was so poignant. So we were getting this delivery giant truck that's going to be stored in the basement. I look at the truck, I see all the stuff, I know the basement. I say, there is no way it's going to fit there. It's just not going to. I'm a genius. I have a genius award. I've been declared a genius. Good. The person who was going to take the furniture out of the truck and store it downstairs was somebody who is uneducated, who sees himself, I'm pretty sure, as a loser. Okay. He not only gets all of it in the space, but makes it so everything is accessible. And the moment that happened, I said, it's just not fair. Here people keep assuming I can do all these things. People praise me, enormously. He was so clearly superior to me at this point.
Right.
And, so then I wrote this little song based on this, a ditty, as I'd call it, for my grandkids. They were 5 at the time.
I saw you even sang it on the Jordan Peterson.
I sang it.
I was amazed.
Yeah. I tried not to sing it. The whole point of this, I should sing it, but I don't think I'm going to now.
It's okay.
Okay. Was that everybody knows something, and everybody doesn't know something else. Everybody can do something, and everybody can't do something else. It was to the tune of the old Sara Lee commercial. Everybody doesn't like something, but nobody doesn't like Sara Lee. Okay, so this was, and it to me, it's such a small thing. But to me, it would change the world if people recognize this.
That you can learn from everyone.
Well, that, all of the people who get D's and even C's and failed courses, from a very early age come to see themselves in a negative light. And it's very hard to get past that. Very few people do. When if it were a different teacher asking a different question, you might have had a different ordering of who's best in the class.
Why do you think the education system is built this way?
Well, I think that people do believe that there are these absolutes. They believe that 1 and 1 is 2.
I know you mentioned in your book, that there's I wasn't sure if you were saying it in a conspiratorial way. I don't think you were.
Well, let me say something. This is very important because the whole point of this is that I can sing. I'm aware that I can sing. I have a dear friend, and I say, I can't carry a tune. She says, yes, you can, just not very far. All right. But, I love singing. Why shouldn't I sing?
Yeah.
There are so many things that I can do.
Yeah.
So why should I, hesitate with the things that I can't do? And if you don't do them, then you're going to, stay not being able to do them. I was at this giving a lecture in South Africa, and I had a day off. It was several lectures, and I was down at the pool, and I noticed there was a tremendous amount, a very expensive hotel that they put me up in, lots of hotel real estate that was not being used. And the only person who knew about it, other than me, was the cabana boy.
It's unbelievable.
And who would think, to ask the cabana boy? Because we think so clearly. We have our talents, our knowledge, and everything else exists on a normal distribution. Some of us, we know it all. Some we know nothing.
How does humility
most
tie
in the
into
middle.
This? How would you say humility ties into that?
Well, once you recognize the the ubiquity of uncertainty, that would lead you to be humble. When you really believe that horses don't eat meat, 1 and 1 is 2, I got all the A's, it becomes a little harder to be humble.
Right.
I think that humility follows naturally from an appreciation of uncertainty.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you're not you don't have the ability to be arrogant anymore because you don't know as much.
Yeah. And the important thing about uncertainty is right now people think they should know. And so if they don't know and they think they should, then they pretend or they avoid the situation, they're uncomfortable, and because they're making a personal attribution for uncertainty. I don't know, but it's knowable. We need to make a universal attribution. I don't know, you don't, nobody knows.
All right, everybody, want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor for this episode, ISAK Clothing, quick wardrobe change, and I could never be happier. I started wearing their stuff recently. They are a business casual line offering style, comfort, and luxury. They have a fantastic selection of suits, blazers, and polos. Some of their signature products are Supima cotton shirts, which are super comfortable and offer a soft 4-way stretch, breathable material, and offer amazing comfort. Pricing is affordable, ensuring you're not getting garbage, but also that you're not breaking the bank and you're getting great bang for your buck. Customer service, fantastic. That's the biggest thing for me. I use them. They're great. If you want to upgrade your clothing game, make sure to check these guys out. You can find them at ISAKNewYork.com. That's ISAKNY.com. I got you guys a great discount as well. Spend $100, get 20% off. You can enter a promo code upon checkout, Mislaibeled. That's Mislaibeled with an I, and you will be able to get that discount. So again, to check these guys out, go to ISAKNY.com. That's ISAKNY.com. These guys are the new up-and-comers. Their stuff is fantastic. I've been wearing it lately. Super comfortable, affordable. You will not be disappointed. Now back to our episode. You know, in the book you talk about how in the world there's an idea that perhaps we're given all these certainties in order to kind of keep us in check and not let us.
Well, what I suggest, you know, I have, there are those things that I'm reasonably confident about because of all the research that I or others have done. There are other things that just follow from thinking through the problem where I don't have data. But, and this is one of them, you know, that whose purposes are served by the certainty. The certainty maintains the status quo, right? I'm the boss because I know more. If we reveal, you know, what is it?
Different options.
The emperor has no clothes.
Right.
Then things, you know.
So how do you apply this? You know, you're obviously one of the most, you know, famous colleges. You're a professor, the most famous.
Yeah, in the whole world.
In the whole world.
Forever.
How do you make sense of that, given your...
Make sense of what?
Like your problems with the education system, and I'm sure you're giving this class, which is kind of... I could see them not being, you know, potentially super happy with the idea that, you know, they're coming across with a certain education system. You're coming here and sort of challenging that education system.
No, on the contrary, I think, you know, I had this issue with the medical world. I was given this talk, I think they were supposed to be 5,000 women with breast cancer, and it turned out that there were several men there, and also many of the audience were doctors, and I didn't know this. And, you know, when I get started, I thought afterwards, you know, was I appropriately respectful while still taking them to task? And then I spoke to many of the physicians afterwards, and they were thrilled. Really? They know they don't know. You know, the teachers know they don't know. The CEOs know they don't know. And so it's a relief to know that you don't have to know. And I mean, of course, and then there are some people who think they do know until... you know,
teach them that they don't.
Something happens that makes them aware, right?
Okay, so as far as the medical, you know, component of this, I really actually wanted to discuss that because I have Crohn's. So I have a chronic illness. I have a sibling also with Crohn's as well that is much more severe than me, and you know, for the last 7-8 years, she's been, you know, going to one doctor after the next, and they're all pushing medication. And there's a contingency of people that are doctors, but mainly, I would say, nutritionists, let's call it dietitians, that propose that you should go on a diet and stop, you know, drugging yourself up in order to solve a symptom and actually go on a diet and solve the problem. Majority of the medical field is very, very anti this. She decided she's going to go on this diet, the sibling of mine. So I put her on the phone with a different friend that I have that did this diet, cured his Crohn's. He gets on the phone, and the first thing he says is, you need to believe, if you want this to work, that you can cure your Crohn's. If you walk into this believing that you cannot cure it, it's not going to work. It's like, take it from me, I can't claim I have the exact reason why, but I'm just telling you, if you don't buy it. And her response was, the doctors say, though, that it's not curable, so what are you talking about? He's like, that's the point. You need to... So my question is regarding, you know, you talk about self-fulfilled prophecy and mind-body unity in the medical field. Like, what is there to make of all this as far as like the medical field being so entrenched, especially when they know, I should add, that placebos work to a degree?
Well, placebos may be our strongest medicine. Okay, so let's just think for a minute about a placebo. Everybody knows you take this nothing, a sugar pill, all right, or whatever it's composed of, a particular pill, and you get better. It's not the pill that's making you better. So what's making you better? You're making yourself better. Now, you know, if we think about pharmaceutical companies, placebo should be applauded. Everybody should be excited, right? Yeah.
But
the only way pharmaceutical company can make
BlackRock to make money.
vast amounts of money is if in a clinical trial, the drug that they're going to want to bring to market outperforms the placebo.
Right.
So every time the placebo works, that means, they
It's a
can't.
problem.
Yeah.
There's less chance of them making money.
But, for the rest of us, the placebos are incredible. And placebos work, I think, through mind-body unity. That, and in several ways also.
What's the other answer? What's the other way it would work?
Well,
Just coincidence?
what?
Coincidence? That
No.
20%? That can't be explained.
No. But essentially, it's through our expectations, for sure.
Which would be
but what
mind-body
happens?
unity, right?
But what could happen with a placebo is that you take this nothing, but you think it's something. So now you start paying attention to the ways you're better, right? Because you didn't expect to be better,
right.
And that itself is informative and
People don't know they're taking a placebo.
Right, exactly.
Just taking it.
You take medicine. You're expecting you're going to feel better.
Right.
You notice the times you're better. The
Right.
placebo seems to be working, and that.
But that would be a
keeps going.
direct proof, so to speak, to all the research you've done about
Oh,
mind-body
yes.
unity.
For sure.
And my question is, why are doctors so willfully ignoring?
No, I don't think they are. I mean, I think you have doctors with very different beliefs. You have those who are fully on board, those who are fully off board.
I've done a significant amount of research on this. I promise you. I've paid for a lot of money, and a lot.
And you're saying no doctors agree with this.
I'm not saying zero, because there's no certainties,
Mm-hmm.
okay? But I would say the overwhelming majority of doctors, when it comes to, let's say, Crohn's, for sure, and colitis,
Sure.
are like, you come to them, you tell them you're doing a diet for it, they laugh you out of the room.
No, of course. Look at the education that physicians go through.
Right.
It's very, very long, and it's very absolute, right? It's, this bone is this, this happens with this, the medication, so on and so forth. It's very hard to undo all of that, quickly. And I don't think that things should be undone quickly. That it took them a long while to realize the efficacy of whatever the treatment they're using.
Yeah.
Sometimes things do work for snake oil reasons, right? That.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have. People tend not to seek medical care until the problem is big. So let's say you've got a little pain, you ignore it, but then, it's terrible, right? So then you take some medication. Now, and the pain is lessened. So you attribute it to the medication. But that might have been the unusual circumstance, and left alone might have been better. An example, I hit a spectacular serve in tennis. The crowd's just standing and cheering me, right? Now, the next time I hit the serve, what is it going to be? Well, there's a tendency for things to regress to the norm, to the mean, right? So everything, imagine you have a normal distribution. Sometimes at your own level, you're not so good. Most of the times you're medium. Sometimes you're great. Mm-hmm. And the times you're great, then the next time you're likely to be not so great.
Right.
And if you're awful, the next time you're likely to be better. So you take the medication when you're awful. It really hurts. And there are occasions where it gets worse and worse, but typically it's the case that that's the outlier. You take the medication, attribute, so that you take the snake oil, and you assume it worked when in fact it might not have.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You talk about regret and...
There's so much, it's sort of interesting to me when I look back on these things, how I disagree with almost everything that almost everybody has said. But I'm such a good student, and I'm so,
So how does that work?
How does that happen? Yeah. We're jumping around all over the place now, but so be it. Regret, well, first of all, regret has built into it a feeling of helplessness. Because if you did something and it didn't work, if you do it again and you believe it will work, there's nothing to regret, right? Envy, the same thing. Envy has built into it helplessness. I don't have to envy that you can do something, just show me how to do it, right? But for regret, okay, let's take a half a step or 3 steps back. people don't understand typically that outcomes, the availance of an outcome, whether it's good or bad, is in our heads.
Right.
It's not in events. Okay, so anything that you regret doing had another whole way of being understood.
Yeah.
So there were two parts about regret. The first is the assumption is the thing that you regret not doing, that would have worked out better.
Right.
Yeah, how do you know? Could have been worse. But the more important thing is it's better, worseness, or anything in between is a function of the way you view it. I was explaining this on a Zoom podcast I was doing the other day, and I said to them, look, the internet could go out right now. And, some people would say, oh, that's awful. It's in the middle of the podcast.
Right.
To me, I'll go have lunch.
Right.
It wasn't bad at all.
Maybe there's some sort of advantage that there could be to it. You could have an enjoyable cigarette.
Liable, the funny thing is, then the internet went out. It was almost as if I had willed it.
Oh, there you go.
And I did indeed have lunch, and all was fine. That most of the time, so when we regret something, we're acting as if something terrible is going to happen. When we're stressed, we're presuming something's going to happen, and when it happens, it's going to be awful. And all of those predictions leave us feeling bad and tend over time to add to our physical health. So it's stress. I have a few one-liners that are useful, and if people don't take anything away from what I've said except this should be good for you. Next time you're stressed, ask yourself, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience?
Right.
It's almost never a tragedy. Right? And if it were a tragedy and you're thinking about this new thing, somehow you managed to get through it anyway. And to quote Mark Twain, most of the things we worry about never happen.
Yeah.
So just ask yourself, did it happen? Probably not. Will this thing that you're worried about now happen? If you say to yourself, okay, so let's say you're stressed about something. So again, stress requires a belief that something's going to happen. Remember, we talked about things being unpredictable. And two, if it happens, it's going to be awful. Okay, so ask yourself, what are 3, 5, as many as you can come up with reasons it won't happen? So you started off thinking it's definitely she's going to leave me. He's going to leave me. I'm going to be all alone for life. It's going to be terrible. I'm going to fail the test. Whatever it is that you're worried about. And so you're stressed. Now, if you give yourself 3 or 5 reasons why it won't happen, your stress has to be diminished because you thought it was okay. Now, the harder part, which is the part I prefer, I enjoy the most, is it happens, right? Yeah. And say to yourself, how is that actually an advantage?
Right. So I really love that. That changed my entire perspective. And I told you earlier, I got some, unfortunately not great news. And I decided, after studying this for the last 2 weeks, I'm like, okay, so what would you say about this? This is what I was thinking. And I'm like, okay, what are the good outcomes that could come from this? I'm like, well, first of all, I could get more guests on the next time I want to do this trip. I have more time. There were just a variety of different outcomes, and advantages to what happened that I was able to implement. That 2 weeks ago, I would have been much, much more disappointed. Again, it still takes work.
So here's something that's sort of, I'm going to say Jewish, not by religious, but in practice. So many, many years ago, we did a study with people who are about to undergo major surgery. And so I'm teaching them the strategy we were just describing, that it's not events, so on. Okay, now, to test this, I said to them, okay, so the surgeon says, your surgery has to be postponed, so you're going to be in the hospital in another 3 days. Okay. What will you do? She says, all right, I'll cope with it. No, you didn't understand what I said. It's not that you'll tolerate this bad thing. So for me, at the time when I did this study, and people were in the hospital a lot longer. They don't keep you there these days. But that for me in the hospital, that meant that there'd be, I'd lose weight.
Right.
I'd have time to actually read and think and not be bothered by it, And so if my time there were extended, I'd lose more weight, I'd have more time to relax, and so on. So the person who would answer this and saying, all right, it won't be so terrible, or I'll cope with it, I'll accept the bad, in other words, was not learning, because it wasn't accepting the bad.
It's
understanding
seeing it as how it can be good.
exactly how it's good. And, everybody teaches us, parents, television, movies, schools, these events are bad, these events are good. These outcomes, getting an A is good, failing is bad, but not necessarily. In some sense, there's a lot of pressure on kids who get A's because they don't know how they got them. And they know that maybe everybody's expecting that you'll be just getting A's, and
so it's almost like if he gets B's, like, who cares? Sort of like, it's fine. There's a pro to that as well.
Yeah,
that we can look at and
exactly,
be totally okay
exactly.
with. Yeah,
the example I used in the book was very important to me, because I could imagine when I talk like this, there are people who say, "You from your ivory tower, what do you know about hardship?" I say, "Oh, let me tell you." Yeah. I can go through. I lost my mother when I was very young. I was divorced when I was very young. I got taken by 2 psychopaths.
I saw that.
One,
that
two.
story is crazy.
I've had lots of things, but the one that I talk about more in the book, to make this point, was I went out to dinner. I came back, and all of my neighbors were outside because my house had burned.
Yeah.
So I lost 80% of what I owned. Next day I called the insurance agent, and he came and he said, this was the first time, it sounds like I'm bragging, but I'd rather see myself as sharing. He said this was the first time in the 25 years he's been doing this work where the damage was worse than the call. Most, oh my God. And he gets, it's not so bad. This was, but I thought I had already lost whatever was in the fire. Why throw my sanity away after it?
How did you handle that? Did you look for ways right at that moment
no,
to see it as better?
No, you see, that I'm glad you asked me that, Leibel, that this is the way I've lived so much of my life that it comes quite naturally. To learn how to do this, you have to actually reframe things. You say, oh, this feels bad. What is the advantage to it? But I start off just noticing the advantage.
Yeah.
So I don't have to do any reframing. It's just.
Can we not consider that as mindless? It's
no.
like a catch. It's like.
And no, I know that I could also tell you, how people would see it as negative. But, I'm not saying that with any of these things it is this particular way.
Right.
I'm saying that my experience of it, I will feel better about it, recognizing it from this perspective rather than the other.
Once you build in this way of thinking, you're effectively mindful always. That's really,
I think so.
That's what makes the question a stupid question to begin with. If I'm being honest, it's like.
But if you evaluate all of your questions, we're not going to have anything to talk about.
Oh, that's true. Fair enough. Do people's personalities affect their ability to be mindful or be mindless?
I don't know. I know that social psychology has always differentiated itself from personality psychology by saying that behavior was context dependent. So rather than I am who I am wherever I am who I am based on, the social setting.
Right.
So everybody more or less is quiet in libraries, is cheering at football games. That's the context, the library. It's to me an interesting question because it led me to think, well, if your behavior is context dependent, who determines the context? And the more mindful you are, the more choices of context, then in some sense, the more stable your personality. Let me give you an example. So I adored my mother, and we were very, very close. She's in the hospital context. Now, the rule in the hospital was that you have to leave at, I'm making this up, it was 7 o'clock in the evening. And I said to them, because here's the hospital context, but I had my relationship with and concern from my mother context. And so I said to them right at the beginning, I will leave when my mother wants me to leave. Could be at 6 o'clock. It might not be until 9 o'clock. And I'll do this every day. We can fight about it every day. Or you can look the other way, or you can just understand it and perhaps even make that available to other people as well. So the point was that there were 2 contexts. My behavior, most people's behavior, the rule is you leave at 7, they leave at 7. Now, the way I was able to in some sense, violate that rule was by invoking in other contexts. Whatever is good from my mother is what I'm going to do.
Interesting.
So back to personality, that people tend to stay within particular contexts, so that would make them behave in that same way repeatedly and seem to have personalities. There's, I'm not really sure these days what people mean by personality. There are certainly behavioral tendencies that we're likely to engage in. That if you're scared of talking to people, you're unlikely when you're in a party to be talking to people. If you're not afraid. But it's also the case that I teach my students this. It's interesting because I'll ask them, how many of you are afraid of public speaking? I say, stand up. So 200 kids stand up. Everybody's afraid. And then I'll start talking to them. And so now they're talking in front of 200 people. But they're not afraid. And it's because people are so worried about being evaluated by others. And so you want to find a way to be able to do something that you're afraid of doing, change the circumstance for you. Imagine in the public speaking, for instance, that you're talking to 10-year-olds. Would you be afraid? Let's make them now 15. At what point and why? And so we're so afraid of being negatively evaluated. And the younger you are, the worse this is. I do this thing with my students. They love this. You can't come to class next week unless you're wearing 2 different shoes. All right, now, the ones who want to comply but are afraid, they'll wear 2 black shoes where you can barely tell that they're different. The ones that are really bold will wear a white sneaker and a red sneaker, whatever. But they all do it. And I say to them, man, did anybody notice? No, nobody even noticed. Secondly, if somebody notices, if it's someone they know you don't typically wear 2 different shoes, so what are they going to think of you? And if it's someone you don't know, why do you care? Well, the best thing happened. I did this in a small seminar. One of my students, a wonderful young woman, she comes in there and she says, Professor Langer, you won't believe what happened. I said, what happened? She says, I'm in the elevator with this guy. He looks at my feet. He looks at my face. He looks at my feet. He looks at my face. He points to my shoes and he says, was that intentional? You know what I did? I said, no, what did you do? She said, I looked at his shoes. I looked at his face. I looked at his shoes. I looked at his face. I pointed to his shoes. I said, was that? Which is beautiful. Who decided? It's interesting because it seems that dryers seem to eat socks. I don't know where they go.
Absolutely.
And who decided that your socks have to match? So when
mine don't. So no one decided.
Okay, but when you realize how silly some of these things are, it becomes very freeing. And I find. One of the keys to success is so simple. It's to be confident but uncertain. So you stand tall.
Question out of my. How do you see confidence?
Well, you're
interacting with
because the confidence
what's the confidence?
For many people now, confidence comes from asking themselves, "Do I know it?" And you don't know it, then you lack the confidence. If you ask even, can I know it fully? The answer is no, so you can become more confident. Do I know something about it is different from I know all about it.
Right. I think if you define confidence as one's belief to be able to walk through whatever the difficulty that's coming through, then they could stay on, they could still look at everything and be uncertain about it, but have the confidence that they could get through that thing.
Yeah, I think if you give it an honest try, whatever you're doing, and you know that there's no natural endpoint, it doesn't work, you try it again, do it differently. I think the natural posture for people should be to be confident. I think you start out being happy and confident and the world takes it away from you.
Yeah, I was just talking obviously about confidence and the way you look at that word and define it. So I want to talk about, I know you've spoken about the way we use terminology and what the world has.
Well, a lot of our, I'm very sensitive to language.
Yeah.
We have I talk in the book about better than better. What I mean by that, I have lots of colleagues that I have great respect for, and they get you from this bad place to teach you something better, and then we just stop. And, I like looking for, why stop there? There's always a better way. And a lot of it is in the language that we use. So I did a study, the first study I think I did on mindlessness. So I was studying mindlessness. This is fun. I was studying mindlessness before I started talking about mindfulness. And somebody said to me, you are what you study. I said, okay, so then I'm studying mindfulness. I just turned it around. But at any rate, we had people make a request that was nonsensical. And the request the request was fine. Can I get ahead of you at the Xerox machine? The question then was they then gave a reason, and the reason made no sense, or it made sense, because I want to make copies. What else are you going to do with a copying machine except make copies? And as long as you gave a reason, everything was fine. So that word because was picked up in business schools and whatever. The words that I discuss in The Mindful Body are more interesting to me. Hope. Hope sounds like something good, right? And it's certainly better than being hopeless. Right. But hope has built into it an expectation for failure. When I get up in the morning and I come to the kitchen to have coffee, I don't hope there'll be coffee.
You assume.
Expect, yeah. The word try. Trying is better than giving up, not thinking you could do it at all. But would you try to eat an ice cream cone?
Right.
No. So trying has built into it an expectation for failure. Remember, you usually get what you expect. The one that was the funniest for me, and apropos of what we were talking about before, religion, I was asked to give a sermon in one of the Harvard churches. As we know, I'm Jewish, and I know very little about religion, but I tend to say yes to everything because I feel better saying yes. Okay, so I agreed to do it. Getting along better with the microphone now. I agree. So now I've got to figure out, what is this going to be about? Remember, I don't know very much about religion. So I'm thinking about forgiveness. Now, forgiveness isn't religion, but it sounds religious-y. Right? I could probably get away with it.
Yeah.
So I start thinking about forgiveness, and I come up with something, and actually gave this, and it was sacrilege. It was wonderful, I thought. If you ask 10 people, is forgiveness good or bad, what are they going to tell you?
It's good.
It's good. If you ask 10 people, is blame good or bad, what are they going to tell you?
It's bad.
But you can't forgive unless you first blame. Oh, that's interesting. Our forgivers are our blamers.
Yeah.
Now, do you blame people for good things or bad things? Bad things. But things in and of themselves, as we've already established, are neither good nor bad.
Yeah.
So what do we have here? We have people who see the world negatively, who blame and then forgive. Hardly divine. All right. If you blame, it's better to forgive than not, but there's a better way of doing things.
Is there a point that ends?
No. What do you mean
so let's
ends?
say the Nazis in 19...
Well, no, let's...
Where does this concept end?
Well, let's go there after I have people with this. Yeah.
Would be my question.
And still, there may be exceptions to most of the things that we talk about, but in the lives most of us are living, those extreme examples are not the most relevant.
Right, I just brought one out just to try to
and I'll talk. I'll speak to it in a moment. Okay, so what is the alternative? The alternative is to understand behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. Nobody wakes up, nobody I know at least, or can imagine, wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be obnoxious, aggressive, and stubborn.
Yeah.
All right, so when we cast aspersions at people, what is it that they were intending from their perspective? Well, it turns out that each and every behavior description that's negative has an equally strong positive alternative. So I can come to you and say, Leibel, I'm driving everybody crazy. I am so gullible. As I told you, I was taken by two psychopaths. I mean, I am really gullible, and I don't want to be gullible.
You're going to have to tell people that story, by the way, because...
What?
You're going to have to tell people that story.
No. They can read.
They can read it in the book. It's
and
true.
Part of it is that.
It's there.
No, but the point is that I mark the edge of the gullible continuum. Okay, that's good. We try to change me. I'm going to constantly fail. Why? Because going forward, my intention is not to be gullible. I'm trusting.
Yeah.
And once I realize that as long as I'm trusting, I'm going to at times seem gullible, so be it. I value being trusting. You, for example, are so impulsive that it probably drives your friends crazy. So I'm going to help you not be impulsive. But as long as you value being spontaneous, you're going to be impulsive. You're inconsistent. That's because you're flexible.
Is there a way
you're
to-
boring, which is why you value being stable. Let me just give the bottom line here, which is, so we did a study on this many, many years ago. We give people 300, I don't remember, behavior descriptions. We circle those things you keep trying to change about yourself and you fail. So for me, impulsive, gullible, doesn't matter the rest. Then they turn the page over, and in a random order are the positive versions. And now the instruction for people, circle those things you really value about yourself. My spontaneity and my being trusting. All right, so now just think for a moment how that changes your view of yourself. I don't take myself to task for these negative things. How it changes my feelings about other people. I'm not judgmental because I know that the one judgment, the aspersions I'm casting could be understood very differently. And when in a relationship, somebody says, whatever, I don't fall apart because of it.
It's funny because I was just telling someone that I used to say, and I'm honored because about probably 5-6 years ago, I came to this realization that you were saying that no one would actively do something that's stupid. It doesn't make sense.
No.
So our natural inclination is when someone does do something that doesn't make any sense, we get angry. But if you take a second to realize that from their perspective, it makes sense, whether or not it therefore is true or not or whatever, I mean, we could talk about that, but the person didn't do it on purpose. That's the main thing, right?
Yeah.
They didn't do it wanting to get you upset.
No, they did it on purpose, but the it that they did was not the it that you're accusing them. I was trusting on purpose.
Yeah, but I mean to say is that if they knew it would get you upset, let's just say, they likely would not have done it, right? If you're married, right, and your spouse does something and they're a well-intentioned person and they knew that it would get you upset, the odds are they would not do it, right? And knowing that, it gives you the ability, at least from my perspective, that to not get angry and to be much more understanding.
Yeah, no, I think anger is a tactic of the powerless.
A tactic of the powerless. I mean, okay, or the anxious.
Or the mindless, really.
Are you saying that there's no ability to curb the downsides or just, meaning the negatives of that double-edged sword, let's call it? Should no one attempt to do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. No, I think that we certainly can grow. We certainly can promote growth in the people we care about, but we do it differently from this perspective of not being sure the view we have is the only view, or that a different way of understanding whatever the person is doing. And as long as you don't come in from on high, but rather talk about difference, the person is going to grow. If I tell you that, yes, I appreciate that you're gullible, or you say to me that you're gullible, you certainly can choose to be less gullible. I can choose to not be bothered by when you're gullible, but it all follows very differently when I talk about it resulting from you being trusting.
Right.
I lost part of the question. And
no, meaning effectively, you're not saying that someone shouldn't try to curb the negative aspect of.
No, we don't. We have to understand that the evaluation, whether negative or positive, is not real. It's in our heads. And it has very different ramifications. If you're seeing the world negatively, you're going to end up stressed. You're going to end up suffering psychologically and physically.
Let's say a kid's impulsive behavior is landing him in trouble consistently, right?
Okay, yeah.
But obviously that impulsivity has great potential for great success in the future, spontaneity, creativity, and all those things. Would you say to not work at all and try to teach that kid to at least choose his spots better? Yeah, you come from it from a...
Yeah, no, I think that Look, a friend of mine's son was going to an interview at one of these very, very schools as a kid. And the person who was interviewing him, he knew my work and he was a lovely kid, asked him something, and he answered it could be a pencil. Rather than it is a pencil. I don't, And the particular interviewer thought it was bizarre, and he didn't get points for this, and so on. So you can learn, if you're teaching somebody, you say most of the world sees it this way. It could also be understood in this other way. Some people are going to be upset about knowing there's another view to it.
Yeah.
You have choices. You don't have to. You have choices that you don't have available to you when you're mindless.
Right.
And making yourself, other people aware of those choices, I think is typically a good thing.
Going back a little bit, just because regarding regret, I did have a question. When you say
you regret not having remembered earlier.
Exactly.
Right.
When you say that you never know how it would turn out, and you never know the outcome, so regret as a pointless.
Well, it's not that you don't know how it would turn out. It's that, the second part of what I said was more important than the first, was that it doesn't yield anything. It yields something that you're going to act on, frame, and then experience it based on the way you framed it.
Right.
If you frame it as a tragedy, you're going to experience it as a tragedy. If you frame it as an inconvenience, you're going to get past it.
Are you just referring to that with regards to events, or also with choices that you make?
With everything.
No, meaning, let's say I do something that's morally incorrect. Should I have no regret about that?
It's not that you should have no regret. It's that why did you do it in the first place? And if you understand why you did it in the first place, that's going to, in some sense, obviate the necessity for the regret.
Is that always a good thing?
It doesn't mean you can't learn from it. I did this because I believed that. Now that I understand that I could have understood it differently, I have choices that I didn't have before. So now I'm aware of the other way to be. Right. I stole the candy bar. All right. Why did I steal the candy bar? Because I wanted candy. Now you make me aware that somebody actually paid for that what I'm doing is not respecting the owners of the store, and, so on and so forth. I will behave differently and not steal the candy bar. But I can say, oh my gosh, I'm a miserable person because I did this negative thing. Or I can say, I did this negative thing because of this biased view I was taking. Right. And neither one of those means that I can't then, or the latter, when I respect why I did it, gives me more choices to do it again or not do it again in the future.
So it's interesting. I feel like this a little coincides with Brene Brown's work of like shame and like this particular piece and like guilt. Like, it's not to look at yourself as a bad person versus understanding the choice you made was a bad choice.
If you understand why you did what you did, then you won't feel guilty.
And you think that's a good thing?
Yeah, I think that, guilt can be a motivator. There are many other ways to learn proper behavior, so to speak. If we... It's hard to have the discussion and stay away from the biggies. You kill somebody.
Yeah, we should talk about that, no?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I have any special expertise to talk about that. But if you killed somebody, why did you kill that person? It changes our whole system of law because we want to have good people and bad people and then punish the bad people. And I don't see people that way.
It's not about good or bad. Why can't we say that?
If you do this thing, even if you did it and it's a terrible thing, it's fine for a society to decide you should be punished.
I'm just saying, why is it a problem even if the person goes and does the back end work and figures out what motivated them? Maybe they had a difficult childhood. Who knows? Maybe they were abused, whatever the reason is. Why should they not still have regret for the action that they did, that they took someone else's life?
Okay. if you truly understand why you did it, you shouldn't have any regret. Are we ever that certain about why we did anything? Probably not. So, it'll mitigate the regret. We don't have to live in a world of you experience extreme regret or no regret. There are gradations. And the more we know why we did what we did, the less likely. First of all, if you know why you're doing what you're doing at the time you're doing it, you're not likely to do the terrible things you have in mind.
Well, for sure, but let's say it already happened, and now you check into the treatment, and you figure out why you did what you did. Whatever the reason is, why is it not plausible to say that it's okay to have regret for the action committed, for the pain that was still caused, that you caused to someone else? I feel bad that I caused someone else pain.
Sure, I am not against that.
But I'm saying that would be the concept of regret. I wish I had not done that, not the action, I understand. Why can't both things coexist at the same time?
Of course they can.
Yeah,
of course
that would have been my only question.
But that's not the way regret typically plays out.
So how does regret play out?
Well, who knows? Now we're both guessing. But my guess would be that you say to yourself, you should have known, and when you should have, then you experience regret. And why? So when I give these talks on health, and we'll get to health soon, I hope.
Yes, please.
That this one person, saying to me, "Are you saying that my wife that I'm blaming?" I was accused of blaming the victim, because if you can control the cancer, then those who didn't control it are at fault. And my response to that was no. That if the culture teaches that we have no control over these major diseases, we can't fault ourselves for not knowing.
There's a lot of that when we, just in general, pay attention to and try to get an understanding of why we did something in the first place. It makes it much more easy to be more compassionate on ourselves.
Sure, but even we can use a simple example. It doesn't have to be big, heavily emotion laden. If you thought 1 and 1 was always 2, and now you find out it isn't always 2, how do you feel about that? You probably don't feel stupid. You probably are not angry. You simply feel that you came to that because that's what you were taught, and now you're going to rise above it in some sense.
Yeah, right. I agree, but there's no. That's why I was asking the question of events versus personal choice. Let's say when something happens that I don't like, but I have the ability to look at it from a different perspective. To me, that's great, and as opposed to when something that I personally choose to do, whether or not I know beforehand I shouldn't be doing it, or whether about the action I'm referring to.
When you take the donut, you have the donut, and you regret having eaten it, I think is not the best way of living one's life. I think you should be mindful, decide why you want that donut. It's worth it to have that donut, and then you eat the donut, and you don't need to regret not having.
Right, but I would say the difference there is, from what I'm saying, is that's you're not hurting a donut. You'd be hurting someone else. So there's no moral conversation there. That's just an action. Yeah, I don't see why it would be helpful, let's say, to, sorry for my French, but shut on yourself for making a mistake. There's many ways you could look at it. Maybe tomorrow I'll have a better day because of the fact that I had the donut, and now it'll give me 3 more days of not, eating, and therefore I don't have any shame regarding it. Mm-hmm. As opposed to a moral situation which is causing someone else pain. That's really where I'm more tuning in.
But you have at least two different possible scenarios. One where it's causing them pain, which is a whole different situation from one where you didn't know it was causing pain. And if you don't know that it's causing pain, I don't know that you should suffer for it. You should learn from it at every turn. And I don't think we would knowingly cause pain if we were mindful. I'll tell you something. This is a very extreme statement. Mm-hmm. I have a slide when I used to present this, right? Say, all. And then I say, you can't say all, because I'm an academic, but I really mean all. Virtually all of the ills we experience, whether personal, interpersonal, professional, global, are the direct or indirect effect of our mindlessness. And I truly believe that. And so that if we were able to, and I try to get close to that in the mindful body. If we lived in a more mindful world, mindful utopia, so to speak, it would just be an easier place. We'd respect ourselves, we'd respect each other. Things like rape are a function of feeling powerless. Most of what happens comes from feeling powerless, but we'd be growing up in a culture where everybody doesn't know something, everybody knows something else, so
Everyone's
on.
valued.
Yeah. And I think they were on our way to that, as miserable as things seem right at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that it's more than
How do you see
a pipe
social
dream.
media?
It's okay. It's interesting. Social media, technology, all of these things, people want to know, are they mindless? Are they mindful? There is nothing that we do that has to be done mindlessly or mindfully. That you can be on social media mindlessly, you can be on social media mindfully.
Right.
You can read a book mindlessly, you can read a book mindfully.
But would you say it's sent us in the right direction?
Well,
or
no, I think
a
so.
negative
So there's a lot of evidence now that social media leads to self-esteem problems for young
Right.
people. And when I present this stuff to my students, I said, look, I know it's unlikely that you're going to hear these data and you're going to get off Facebook, Instagram, whatever. I said, but there's nothing that dictates how you are on it. You're Harvard students, for God's sakes. Don't present photos of yourself and stories about what you did that are all glorious. None of you have lived that life every single day.
Yeah.
Some days you have a bad hair day. Post that,
Yeah.
have the guts and change the norms. Because it's not the media that's creating the problem. It's the mindless way the media is being used. So, and every comparison we make runs the risk of causing harm or bad feelings. You have students, so they're doing their PhD. So what they do is look at other people's dissertations, and they panic without realizing this is your first step. That's their last step.
Yeah.
Theirs has been gone over by several faculty, revised and revised, and so on. That we have to make appropriate comparisons, and we make mindless comparisons all too frequently. Even a thing, an agency deciding should they let these two gay men, for instance, adopt a young child. The comparison they're making is a white picket fence, a man and a woman, white picket fence in a community that's a white picket fence community, versus two men.
Yeah.
But the kid wouldn't be up for adoption if that
There's a
were
better
the
scenario
alternative.
available.
Yeah. And I'm not sure the white picket fence where many people came from, and many of these people suffered terrible depression and stress, that we should try to simulate that for most people.
I wanted to get into health.
Let's get into health.
Everything is affected by this concept, and after reading, through the book, mindfulness and mindlessness, everything is affected. But I feel like with health, it's so feels so correlated directly.
Sure.
Really
well,
good.
I mean, in the simplest way, that when you're mindful, the neurons are firing, and that's literally health producing, and people live longer. Straightforwardly.
Yeah.
But as far as mindlessness goes, I'll give you an example, and these are, nobody is going to disagree with this.
Yeah.
But it's pervasive. So you're 20 years old, you hurt your wrist. You're not likely to believe that your wrist should hurt at 20 years old, so you do things about it. You're 70 years old, and you were brought up in a world that says as you get older, you start to fall apart.
Yeah.
You hurt your wrist, you say, well, what do you expect? I'm 70 years old. You don't do anything about it. And down the road, the young girl is healed, and the older woman not, having nothing to do with possibility.
Age.
Yeah.
So what you said, there was a point that you mentioned, which I thought beyond fascinating, as far as things being in remission versus being
yes.
cured.
Okay,
that was so powerful to me.
Yeah. That's
sure?
The remission work exemplifies the better than better, and also, there's a lot that gets lost in language.
Yes.
I go to see my friend Eva, who is suffering from a very unusual kind of cancer. She had just come back from Mass General or Dana-Farber, I don't know where she was getting her treatments. I said, so Eva, how are you? And she said, I'm thrilled, I'm in remission. And then all of a sudden something went off in my head. I said, wait a second. If I took the very same tests, they'd tell me, presumably, I don't have cancer.
Yeah.
Why is that I don't have it, but you have it in remission? Okay. Now, remission is certainly better than having the active case, but not nearly as good as cure. And with breast cancer, this is the one that I find the most irritating, and I've searched for the answer for this for years, and nobody has given me one that is satisfying. They have a 5-year rule. If you're cured, if you're in remission for 5 years, then they'll give you a clean bill of health.
Yeah.
Where does the 5 years come from?
Arbitrary random number.
Exactly. And, and it's not a neutral thing to be in remission. In remission, you think it's there, it's active, you're
I'd
stressed.
be so anxious the whole time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you're stressed, and stress, as you know, I think is probably the major killer. And stress is psychological, which again shows us that we can heal even possibly the worst of the disorders we suffer from. But anyway, so we did this thing where we take people who, we looked at people who are on a breast cancer awareness walk, and we simply divided them, the groups, those who saw themselves as in remission, those who saw themselves as cured. We checked back 6 months later. Those who saw themselves in remission were better on every measure we took. You think about it.
Saw themselves as cured or on remission?
No, those who saw themselves as cured.
Right, okay. So
Did I say it wrong?
Yeah, I believe you did.
Okay,
yeah.
mindless.
So I was just like, did I miss something?
That's right. Okay.
It makes sense.
No, that when you have a cold and the cold goes away, you don't see yourself as in remission, right? And it's very important because when you get your next cold, you built the last cold, so you beat the last cold, so you're a little stronger, better able to cope, and so on. It's a very important difference. And you can, you say, what I argue more persuasively in the book than I am at this moment, you can always see yourself as cured rather than in remission, where the idea would be, look, if you have cancer, the cancer goes away. If another cancer comes back, you can see it as the same cancer, in which case you were in remission, or you can see it as a different cancer. It's never going to be exactly the same.
Right.
It's never exactly the
and
same.
even if it's in the same area of the body,
it doesn't matter.
It's not the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you see it as different, then seeing yourself as having been cured from the first one makes you stronger and better equipped to deal with anything down the road.
It's such a game changer. Yeah. Also, the stress.
Well, there are words. I mean, you can be a victim or a survivor.
Yeah.
Very different.
Are you familiar with the...
Probably not.
The Body Keeps the Score?
No.
Bester van der Kolk. Like it's a trauma-based book about how we hold on to our trauma based on our mind a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, our bodies, if our minds and bodies are one thing, then quite naturally, when people talk about muscle memory, which is more evidence for mind-body unity. Mm-hmm. And we have so much evidence. Do you remember the borderline effect in the book? So imagine.
Oh, the 5.9 or 6, yes. I do.
The borderline effect, there's always a point where right below it is problems, right above it, but at that point, there's no difference. So the example, let's use IQ. So we take an IQ test, you get a 70, I get a 69.
That's terrible.
No,
why do we have to be on this?
It's better than 69 because I'm below the cutoff.
I understand.
All right, so I am cognitively challenged.
You're right.
You're not. But nobody in their right mind, you don't have to know anything about statistics, would think there's a meaningful difference between the score 69 and 70. I could have sneezed, misread the question, I didn't sleep so well, but we're in two different groups now. You're in the normal group, and you progress. I'm in the challenge group. Yeah. The expectations everybody around me has from me, my expectations for myself, are quite different. And I think the moment we're given those labels, if we say 3 months out, 6 months out for sure, there'd be very real differences between us.
How important do you think parenting is to this?
What is the this? It's
To teaching kids to effectively be mindful and not like show them that, oh, if you got the 69, now you're
sure. No,
in the
I
lower
think
group.
I think the more people that are aware that everything they're taught is a probability, not an absolute, parents would naturally gravitate to telling the child, well, we don't know. That looks that way for some people, but it might mean something very different from you. You have ADHD, for example. Well, it's a strange diagnosis in the first place, but people who have ADHD are more mindful.
Yeah.
People who are dyslexic are more mindful. There are many big upsides, to these things, and just to focus on the downside is a mistake.
Yeah, no, there's so many famous people that Richard Branson's dyslexic. I mean,
Sure.
there's a lot of very, I think most of the actually very, very successful people have some sort of, like one of these, one of the typical, labels of being, ADHD or, et cetera. As far as someone who wants to take practical steps about being mindful, like there are no, like you're saying at the same time, there's no practicing it. Meditation is a practice. Mindfulness
it's appreciating the power of uncertainty and exploiting the power of uncertainty.
So how would you implement that in a very real way?
I think that every time you disagree with somebody, realize you're being mindless.
Could it be that you thought it through and you've come to a conclusion, even if it's not certainty based?
Certainly you can come to a conclusion, but the whole interaction goes very differently when you respect the other person's position.
The opposing viewpoint, right?
Yeah. All right, so you hear say, of course, obviously. Nothing is of course or obvious. When you understand, it can mean so many different things from different perspectives. If you seek multiple answers to whatever the problem is, every time you're upset, okay, so when you're happy, you could be, oblivious and mindless. Okay, you can't do anything in those moments. But most people, sadly, are not happy.
Yeah.
Most people are miserable and stressed and depressed and, feeling lonely, bored, whatever, most of their days, which is very sad to me. So when you're going through all the reasons that you're stressed, then is a time to look at all of the things that I'm saying about how to reverse all of that. I want to do the study. I haven't, but it's so simple. Let's say you're lonely, you're bored, you're stressed, you're depressed. Okay. And I'll ask you to thread a needle. Just thread a needle. Mm-hmm. Now, and if you're older and so it could be a bigger hole in the needle, it could be thread a bead. It doesn't matter. But it's got to be something that requires you to be there. And so you just do it, and 5 minutes later, and I would say to you, how did you feel while you were doing it? You didn't feel bored, lonely, depressed, stressed, or any of those things because you were actively attending to something else. So this active engagement, which is the active noticing, is a panacea almost, a cure-all to almost all that ails us, certainly all that ails us psychologically.
What about, let's say, trauma that is induced from, God forbid, people have difficult childhoods and stuff,
sure.
abuse and stuff of that nature.
Yeah.
Is that a suggestion to avoid, let's say, healing that component?
No.
Doing what you're suggesting?
I don't want to make some of these very big experiences that people have sound,
but that's a pretty fair one.
That it's so easy to turn it inside out and make it,
Yeah.
But I do think that when you've experienced trauma, it's because you're seeing the event, freezing your understanding of the event, and understanding it differently has got to be helpful.
Yeah.
So that's the way I would deal with.
Sure. That's effectively what cognitive behavioral therapy is.
And my work was the was important in the beginning of all that. Yes, that's right.
You see that. Also, EMDR, I think, is very, very powerful towards this. I mean, again, the mind-body connection, unity. I'm sorry, I will not say connection ever again. The mind-body unity.
I doubt that.
Right? Ever. Certainty. The mind-body unity.
It's hard to have a conversation.
It is, by the way. It's challenging, but it's good to be challenged in this way because it makes you start thinking about things. Like I was reading your stuff and I was just like, like this is all true. The mind-body unity piece.
Oh, let me tell people a couple of the studies there, just so they can appreciate this. All right. So this is beyond eating the pancreas making me sick. Okay. So the next study we did in the series, I did with Ali Crum, who's a professor at Stanford right now. We take chambermaids, and we ask the chambermaids, how much exercise do you get? Now, these women think they don't get any exercise because they see exercise, according to the Surgeon General, as what you do after work. Because the Surgeon General sits at a desk all day. So they're too tired. It's a very simple study. We divide them into two groups. We teach one group that their work is exercise. Making a bed is like working at this machine at the gym, and so on. So now we have two groups, very simple. One knows their work is exercise. The other group doesn't. Okay. 3 weeks later, we want to find, I think it's 3 weeks, we want to find out, are they eating any differently? One group, no differences there. Are they working any harder? No. Then the important measures. Simply by changing their mindset, seeing their work as exercise, they lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. Now, the way which is kind of remarkable, right? This is really a study on the nocebo effect. So placebo, you take a nothing and you think it's something and it does its work. A nocebo, you're doing something but you think it's nothing and it eliminates the advantage to it. So imagine now, you go to the doctor, you're given medication, you take the medication and it doesn't work. So what is the doctor likely to do? Up the medication. Rather than enlist your support in it. We shouldn't be passive with respect to our own health. Our mindsets, our beliefs are stronger than most of us have.
So this goes back to it. If you're someone that has built in the belief that you cannot heal from, let's say, an autoimmune disease,
then you're probably not going to heal from an autoimmune disease.
Yeah, I happen to believe it. But the problem, what makes it so difficult, is that there's no certainty and definitive data that shows this outright. Meaning, to me, I agree with you. There definitely is data. I mean, you've done this. But when I go tell someone this, and I've done this, they're like, that's just crazy. Like, sure. I mean, they're being mindless, probably.
Yeah.
But,
we have...
How do you explain, let's just say, losing weight for those chambermaids? Like, what would you tell someone of why they lost weight?
Because the mind was now in a different place. And if the mind and body are one, then all of a sudden, in some sense, there's a release on the ability to lose the weight that exercise is. If you don't believe that exercise results in weight loss, then I don't think, if there's a society or a person somewhere, then I don't think we would have gotten that effect. Let me tell you a couple of more of the studies so that people get a better idea.
Please, yes.
There are many, and they're all in the mindful body. But the most recent was a study I did with my graduate student, Peter Ungel, where we inflict a wound. It's a minor wound because I'm not a sadist. And even if I were, the powers that be wouldn't let me do the study. It's a minor wound. Each person individually is in front of a clock. Unbeknownst to them, the clock is rigged. So for a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, the clock is going half as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it's real time. Most people would assume the wound is going to heal when the wound heals. Yeah. But no, the wound heals based on clock time. Our perceptions. Now let's put it all together. We have the medical world. So let's say you broke your leg, and now I'm making up the numbers because I don't know.
Yeah.
And, you ask the doctor, how long is it going to take me to heal? And the doctor says 6 months.
Yeah.
What does that mean? There's no study that can say your leg is going to heal in 6 months. All we have are probabilities and averages.
So let's pick up to your point. There are some famous running backs in the NFL that tore their ACL, which is officially like a 12-month recovery time. I forgot his name. He's a very famous running back. I'm not going to even try to figure out his name and remember it offhand right now. but he came back after like 6 months and had the greatest running season ever. He ran up for over 2,000 yards, I believe. So they could choose to point to that and say there are people that have done this in 6 months, and you'll walk into your recovery thinking,
exactly.
I can do it.
But there's no reason to think 6 months is the.
So that's what I'm saying. Where does that end?
I don't know.
If I told someone one day,
yeah,
well, we all know that wouldn't happen in one day.
We don't know. No, you say we all know that nobody would believe me. But I said so I used to be on this committee on aging at Harvard, the medical school, and Jack Rowe, my friend, was in charge of the committee. Dr. Rowe. And I called Jack one day and I said, Jack, how long does it take for a broken finger to heal? He goes, I don't know, let's say a week. I said, what would you say if I could heal it with psychological means in 5 days? He said, all right. I said, what about 4 days? He said, all right. What about 3 days? He said, no. I said, okay, what about 3 days and 23 hours?
I mean, but
what is the point?
I agree.
Here you can't and here you can.
I agree, but I'm with you, of course. And that's really my question, effectively. But there has to be a point.
No, there doesn't.
It can't be a second.
We don't know.
You think it could be a second?
I don't know. I think that in some ways it's healthier from a research perspective, at least, to presume unlimited and then,
For sure, and then go from there, of course. But there still has to be a...
There doesn't
You're
have
saying it
to
doesn't
be.
have to be a point one way, but you would... I assume you would agree that at that point I could go to 1 second. The second that happens 1 second
The
later.
second you think it, yeah.
But you can't heal a clear wound in 1 second, no matter the universe wouldn't allow for it. I would think.
Yeah, no, you
So
say
there is a
that
point, not
our
3
laws, our laws of biology and physics would suggest otherwise, but our laws of biology and physics will certainly change over time.
Yeah.
New information leads to new theories. One of these studies speaks to what you're saying now. So we have people in a sleep lab. They wake up, the clock has been moved without them knowing. So they got either 2 hours more sleep, 2 hours fewer, the amount, and biological and cognitive function follow perceived amount of sleep. Now, I do a lot of work with this and on the notion of fatigue, which I see largely as a psychological construct.
Please tell me about that, because I struggle with this.
So I ask my students, how far is it humanly possible to run? So these are Harvard kids. They know a marathon is 26 miles. They know it. I wouldn't ask the question, right, if it were 26 miles.
Yeah.
So they usually start at 30. Someone else yells out 35, and this like an auction. Excuse me. And then somebody says something like 50, and everybody groans. Okay, because it just seems, how could you run 50 miles? Then I turn on a YouTube of the Tarahumara, which is a tribe in Copper Canyon, Mexico, who can run over 200 miles without stopping. And to my mind, and I've said this many times before, that the difference between what people now believe we can do and what we probably are able to do, or at least in this case are able to do,
exponential.
Is, yeah.
It's worlds. Who's the one? Was it David Goggins? I think his name is. He runs 100 miles routinely.
Yeah.
He's an intense fellow, to say the least. But I think it's him who says that in a typical situation where we think we've maxed out our body, we truthfully have only maxed out 40% from a physical nature.
Yeah, I don't know the percentage,
right,
how he comes up with that. But it's still, there's no reason to believe that we're as good as we can be.
I mean, in general, we always see that if we give ourselves a further goal.
Yeah,
it's like Elon Musk's, all the time, right? He's to give someone, if you give somebody, he says, I give you 30 days to clean your house, it'll take you 30 days. If I give you 3 days, you'll get it done in 3 days. It's a similar idea. All right, guys, sorry, we just took a quick second break, so the dog could use the restroom and all that stuff, but there's still a little bit more to get to. So I wanted to ask you about, let's say, the mindlessness component of, we talked a little bit about it, but I wanted to ask more on the education system and the difficulties that authority makes on trying to succeed. The box that they put things in, and then you want to go outside that box, just in general, right? And of course...
So let me tell you a fun study that we did that speaks to leadership, the person in charge, and what have you. So this was a study where we used different orchestras. Now, as you may know, many people who are in orchestras are bored to death because they're playing the same pieces over and over and over again, right? So we take several orchestras and we have One set of them, they're going to be in the mindless group, where they're told, remember a time, this is going to be relevant, it's going to take a while to get there. Remember a time you played this piece where you enjoyed your performance and try to replicate it. The mindful orchestras were told, when you play this piece, make it new in very subtle ways that only you would know. Now, it has to be subtle because they're playing classical music, not jazz, right? Okay. The pieces are taped and then played for an audience that has no idea what the instructions were. People overwhelmingly prefer the mindfully played piece, and the orchestras overwhelmingly prefer playing them that way. You can't enjoy it when you're a robot. You can only enjoy it when you're mindfully engaged. Okay, so I start writing this up, and I realize that this speaks to leadership in a way that I had no idea going into the whole thing, which is, here we have a situation where we have superior coordinated performance with everybody doing their own thing. But they're all drawing from the same ongoing situation, which led me to believe that the role for the leader is to provoke the mindfulness in those being led, which you're more likely to do when you realize everybody doesn't know something.
Yeah.
You have respect for other people, when we don't have good, bad out there, but rather people with diverse talents.
So again, you would say true leadership is you would define that as, how would you put that into words?
I would say that the best leader is one who is going to provoke the mindfulness in other people. The best leader is a person who knows he or she doesn't know. That there's another one-liner I have that speaks to a lot of business leadership, which is, right now, we tend to use yesterday's solutions to solve today's problems. And that the good leader is aware of that. And so the good leader knows that what worked yesterday may not work right now. And so you're attentive in ways that them's that know tune out.
Yeah. I'm just trying from a practical application, because that's always how my brain goes in that one. How am I going to do that?
Yeah.
Especially with leadership, because
one of the things that we found consistently with leadership is that people who are mindful are seen as charismatic, trustworthy, and authentic. So another reason for the leader to be mindful.
Very, very interesting. It does really affect every single component.
Everything.
Yeah.
And we've been doing this for such a long time, close to 50 years, so plenty of opportunity to plug in different measures. So we find that when we make people more mindful or encourage people to be more mindful, they're healthier, they're happier, they live longer, they're more innovative, their relationships are better, their memory is better.
Just on the stress component, it makes total sense.
Less stress, yeah.
Because stress weighs people down. It really does. It causes so many issues that, again, I don't know how proven they are. I'm sure there's research that is done, but that's clear that stress really weighs on the mind and breaks people down.
I was going to do this work during COVID, and it came to nothing, with people in China. I wanted to get, because there's so many people over there, I wanted to get people who were just diagnosed with one of 4 or 5 different kinds of cancer, large numbers, right? And measure them, their stress level. First, anybody finds out they have a dread disease, nobody's going to be happy. So give people a little while to deal with it. Give them 3 weeks. Then after that, we measure the level of stress every 3-4 weeks. I believe the level of stress will predict the course of the disease over and above genetics, nutrition, even treatment.
Yeah.
And little by little, the medical world is coming around to this. Every day, if you read some of the medical journals, we see
Unfortunately, I think there might be a strong conflict with Big Pharma and the medical world that's always going to make it difficult to really focus in on what you're saying.
Well, no, because then Big Pharma will come up with anti-stress medicine.
But the point is, you don't need the anti-stress medicine.
Exactly, but
and they'll never let that
be
fully.
known.
I mean, that's I'm
Maybe.
not. I wasn't. What are your thoughts on, let's say, RFK and his?
No, I'm not going to get
positions?
into that. I think, like everybody else, some of the things, I think what he says about processed food is probably right.
Right. That's all. I'm not asking for...
And the rest of it probably very wrong.
Okay. No, I'm not. But I think it's good. Honestly, I'm like, there's a certain point, especially with my illness and knowing a lot of people who have the same illness, because I have it. So naturally.
We have to talk about the attention to variability.
Yes, yes,
okay.
100%. But I was just like, it became so clear to me that the processed food and chronic illness situation is so interlinked. There's like,
it's also, we don't want to do that mindlessly, because whatever the data are that are anti-processed food are still also probabilities. Not everybody is going to be affected and negatively, and how much processed food, certainly, I like potato chips, among other things, and I like a hot dog in the summer or whatever. And I can't imagine that there's research that's going to be found that's going to say that that's bad for me. If all I'm eating are potato chips and hot dogs, yes, but is that because of the potato chips and hot dogs, or is it because I'm not having the broccoli and tomatoes and...
So how do we make a decision in a society as to what to implement and not implement? Given that you're right, there's never going to be 100% certainty on cases.
Yeah,
but
if you have a school menu, I think that the foods that have been shown to be good for most people should be on the menu. But I don't think we need to scare parents or kids, parents who can't afford all of the fresh food, that they're causing terrible illness in a child by on occasion giving them whatever sweet thing or processed food they give them. I mean, I think we just need, to be a little more sensible. And
no, for sure.
I don't think if you said to anybody, is all processed food in any quantity bad, that nobody is going to say yes. But still, when we promote things, we act as if horses don't eat meat, one and one is two, rather than most of the time this may be the case.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because from that, that's really what I've been tuned in on, and what opened my eyes, just because the processed food component. I think really my question would be, is that when you're trying to make groups laws and rules, right? Well, I think it's hard to
No, it is, but so it should be given as suggestion rather than law, and that with alternative ways of dealing with things. So this is going to seem a silly example, but I remember.
What about when money's involved? That's my only question.
Yes, yeah,
because that's the difficulty.
That if I wanted to tell these young women these very high heels are not good for them. All right. Now, I know they're going to wear them anyway. So instead of saying they're not good for them, let's figure out, after you wear them, what things you might do to counteract the negative effect.
Yeah.
Right? So that if you're eating, as the potato chips is on his list, I don't know, you're eating potato chips, the times you're eating potato chips, then have some more broccoli. I don't know what the particular formula is. And that gives people more control.
I'm so with you for sure in individual cases, because, you're able to have a rational discussion with whatever it is. But when there's money involved and it's on a bigger level, let's just say in this case, right? BlackRock owns every single big Pepsi, Coke, you name it, all these big companies, right? They're kind of with the medical situation we were talking about before. It's all driven by money. So the minute you have something that is allowed, they're going to exploit the heck out of that. Mm-hmm. And now the ability to it's also on every single thing we eat. So it's it's obviously how good, is it 100%? No.
No, but you see, part of the problem is that we have a sense that you can only enjoy yourself when you're doing A, B, and C. That's eat the potatoes because you can't have a good time without that.
Yeah.
We haven't taught people how to have fun. So I don't know if you've ever seen the video on piano stairs.
Yes.
Okay, so it's wonderful. So to describe it for your audience, so you go to a subway, any place in the world probably, and you have an escalator next to stairs. Everybody is taking the escalator. So then these people lay down piano keys on the stairs. So they do as you go up the stair. And now, in a very short time, everybody is now enjoying the stairs. And I say to my students, why wait for somebody to lay down the piano keys? You can do it up the stairs anyway. That the idea of there are these things that just can't be enjoyed. Everything can be made into fun or at least interesting. if we don't teach people these are the bad things, these are the good things, that if you say to your child, yes, you can have the ice cream after you eat your vegetables, you're saying the vegetables are bad, right? So that's why I'm going to pay you in some way, to eat them.
Would you
Make
give
the
your child
vegetables
ice cream
fun.
at the same time?
I think some ice cream is always fun, but what I'm saying is that we make many of the problems for ourselves that don't need to be there by our own views of this is bad, versus this is good. When engaged mindfully becomes fun. We had this study, it was a fun study, where we take things that people hate. So we have women watching football, people listening to classical music who don't like classical music, people listening to that heavy metal, whatever, don't like that.
That I don't
people
like.
looking at paintings in one of a few ways. The first is they just do it. The second, they notice one new thing about it. The next condition, they notice 3 new things. The next 6 new things. The more you notice, the more you like the thing you're noticing. So if you're watching football, even if all you're noticing are the rear ends of the football players, you're getting engaged.
Well,
and that engagement, that's the essence of all the fun we have is feeling engaged. And we don't have to wait to become engaged. All you need to do is notice new things and you naturally become engaged.
It also makes a lot of sense. Like, let's say you just taught someone, let's say you had a woman watching football, or a man for that matter, who doesn't like it. But a lot of times they don't know the sport.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
the minute you teach them 5 new things about it and they're able to follow the sport, all of a sudden they love it.
Yeah.
I mean, typically, I don't know how many people actually know the detail, like the basics of football.
Yeah, but you don't need
People who say
to-
they don't like them, the first thing you have to ask them is,
What is the it?
What is, well?
What is the it? I don't
just
like it. What is,
how many points do you get for a touchdown? And they'll be like, I have no idea. So what are you telling me you don't like it? Let me tell you all the rules of the game and how the game works.
well, but you can enjoy it without knowing any of those rules. The ball is in the air. Is he going to catch it? Yes or
True,
no?
but
What
if
makes
you
you
learn
think
more things, to your
Sure,
point, then
yeah,
you would enjoy it more
sure.
and more. So,
But I'm thinking if you are involved with somebody who doesn't like football, the way to get them involved is not to give them the rules.
You would say,
Just
how
notice this, look at how cute that guy is. How big. You think the big guy is going to be able to run the fastest?
Right.
Is he going to go to the right or the left? Is he, whatever, just in a smaller, more fun way.
more simplistic.
Well, it's simple, but not simplistic.
Right, just
It's a different level of analysis. Bottom up or top down. Top down, here are the rules. Bottom up, what are the people actually doing?
Was your mom very mindful?
I think so. She was not highly educated, but she was street smart.
Really? Interesting. And I know your relationship, before you even said that you were very close with her.
And with my father.
And with your father. Could you talk to that a little bit?
What to say?
No, just what about them that was, you said you grew up in an incredible home. What about it was...
They were just very supportive. Again, I'll give you an example and tell you why it's hard to answer your question. I was in a dentist's office as a child. I'll never forget this. And then my mother came in and the dentist said what a good patient I was. And I thought immediately, what were the other kids doing in there? It wasn't, that I could have done A, B, and C and I chose I'll follow the rules and I'll be, So it's the same thing about having grown up in one house, not knowing
what's happening around you.
Yeah, I mean, my parents told me as I got older that they didn't know where I came from. It was. I mean, my mother worked, when I was young, straight through, so I didn't see her a lot. We had our Fridays and Mondays that were, we saw each other a whole week, but those were the days we really spent time, and. She was able to laugh at her errors. I remember she had the world's worst sense of direction. So she would pick me up from elementary school every Monday and Friday. And she knew to make a turn by this hot dog stand. And the guy moved.
There were no horses there.
No, he moved his cart. And she couldn't find it.
Have you faced, how have you dealt with, especially in the Ivy League schools now, in the wake of October 7th, obviously having a Jewish identity, how has that been, difficult, challenging?
Sure, but not for me personally, because I'm not there that often, and I'm not as engaged in many ways as maybe I should be, or I was certainly when I was younger. But it was difficult for everybody. It was difficult for the Jewish kids, difficult for Gentiles as well, for faculty, staff.
Yeah.
Because the people knew that many things could go awry.
Yeah.
Most didn't.
Yeah, no, that was a crazy time.
Hard, yes.
Yeah. And your suggestion to, like, let's just say Jewish kids or people that are being affected by it, just in general. I mean, thank God I think it stopped now for the most part, but at least at this time, would be to do what? Just like as far as how to react and as far as how to see it, I should say.
Well, I think that whether the stressor is big or small, my response to it is pretty much the same. The first thing is to recognize that most of the things we fear don't end up happening. And so we're sending good energy after bad.
Yeah.
That there's time. The work of worry, so to speak, is mindless, I think, and doesn't strengthen us. So if you just keep living your life, you end up stronger and stronger, so that if there is something eventually to deal with, you have more resources than worrying constantly about things that may or may not happen, which is separate. I'm not suggesting people shouldn't take action. During COVID, I wrote a piece about, what I called mindful optimism versus defensive pessimism. Defensive pessimists, defensive pessimists believe you should think the worst and hope for the best. But our thinking is what creates lots of our reality, because I can see you, for example, as shy or a snob. If I see you as one or the other, shy, I'm going to, try
so
to
funny, that
befriend
just
you.
happened recently. Someone's like, I can't talk to the guy. He's so won't engage at all. I said, no, he's just shy.
Yeah.
Just
exactly.
Once you get going, guy's the nicest guy in the world.
And then even if, in fact, he had been a snob, chances are he'll break down, and people prefer being nice to not being nice. And if he's a snob, so this is kind of interesting. I can get to this by way of bullying, which I talk about. So when you're raising kids, and you tell them, it's not nice to bully. It's not nice to pick on people weaker than you, which I think is ridiculous, that reinforces the bullying, right? You're saying you push this kid around, that means you're stronger.
Right.
What people should be taught is to feel sorry for the bully. And this is the bully who's 10 years old or who's 60 years old, at any age. Nobody who has it together bullies. Bullying is a sign of weakness. And so if you teach children that to feel sorry for the bully, and the bully knows this, there's nothing in it for the bully to bully.
Interesting.
And I've done this in trying to help women in organizations who have very high positions, but there's still some man higher up who bullies, whatever we call it at that stage, tries to intimidate her, and just recognize it doesn't come from a position of strength.
It's interesting. I was going to ask you about being a woman, and especially in the early years in the 70s. I mean, you've been around obviously for a long time. How that changed from when you started, your career till now, and what hurdles you had.
Oh, those are 6 different questions rolled into one.
Well, there you go.
The first question is the easiest to answer. People ask me all the time, how have the students changed? I have no idea in some sense, because I've also changed. So I'm witnessing something that I didn't witness before. Is that because it wasn't there before, or because I didn't notice it before? So I can't really speak to that. Certainly there are differences, but also more similarities than differences. What was the other 12 questions?
I was asking how it changed for you. Like, what hurdles there were for you?
Yeah. I think that the older I get, the more I find everything around me sort of easy.
Really?
That when I was young and worried about what people thought of me, I might walk around like I got something on my shirt.
Yeah.
I walk around like this, looking like an idiot, but not realizing it, so people wouldn't see I spilled something on myself. That's why, who cares?
Who cares?
Yeah. And, so in that better than better, I talk about sort of three levels three levels. And the first and the third look the same, but they're very different. So let's use as an example. I don't know, I always use the New Yorker, although I think it's a wonderful magazine, but I'm still going to use it here. Level one, people who don't read the New Yorker. Level two, people who read the New Yorker. Level three, people who don't read the New Yorker anymore. 1 and 3 look the same.
Yeah, but they're not.
They're very different. We could have them reading again.
I read
2
this,
and 4.
yeah, I mean.
Yeah. And, so very often the people who have the most going for them are level 3s who the world is run, I believe, by these level 2s who think they know. They see the level 3s, they think they're level 1s.
Yeah.
An example of the 3 levels with age might be, when you're young, you're uninhibited. So you need to be true. You don't know what the rules of society are. Then you become like most people, I don't know what age, let's say 13 through, for some, whole lives, you become inhibited. Hopefully, you get to a point where you become disinhibited, where, it's not that you don't know the rules, it's that you don't respect the rules in the same way, right? Now, so if you see an older person doing something, the mistake is aren't they being childish? But it's a level 3, not a level 1.
Is the application as far as whether or not, granted the person's not being childish because they're self-aware, does that mean that they shouldn't care about, what they're doing?
No.
Let's say their actions are, how would...
No, it's okay to care, but if you know there are going to be strong advantages to not caring, that's going to lead you not to care in the same way if you care. You have choices. I could, with the spot on me, walk around like this, or I could not. If I'm not, there are some people who are going to say, she's walking around, her sweater is dirty, but you're probably going to have just as many people who say, isn't that nice, she's so free. And I think that's what I was saying before about there's a different way of being than most people, I think, have gravitated towards, which is to be confident but uncertain.
Yeah.
And if you're confident and uncertain, it doesn't matter if your shirt is torn or your nylons, when I was a kid. I don't understand, I go to Home Depot, it's a fun store for me, and there's nothing about me when I'm there that looks Home Depot-ish. But not everybody, every time, there's somebody who'll come over and ask me questions for information about the store. Which I find humorous,
That person's
right?
probably me.
Yeah, and there's a way that people... Well, first of all, when you're confident and uncertain, you seem friendlier to people. And you are friendlier because you're not afraid of them asking a question. You're not thinking that you know the answer. You don't think you're better than... I don't think that I'm better than anybody. But I also don't think that anybody is better than I am.
Yeah.
It's a very different way of being in the world where everything else is lined up, on this normal distribution where we evaluate talent, intelligence, beauty, everything based on standards without asking the question, where did these standards come from?
Do you think there's a natural instinct of the world that was built into the world that has
No.
led us to this point
No.
that
No.
humans want to conquer and therefore there's a
I don't know. I think that...
higher, lower...
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure of the answer, but I think that there's always somebody who's benefiting by keeping everybody else still. And now, if that person that's pretending that they know that's leading everybody else to feel less than were happy, if those people were happy, then all right, we could make an argument. I wouldn't, but people could argue. But I don't know if you look among the billionaires, millionaires, that as a whole, I don't think they're a happy group.
I think more people would be happy living in this house on this lake than being a billionaire. I'm not kidding. I mean... Yeah,
the main thing is people need to understand, I believe, that you want all the money so that people will respect you, so that you can then respect yourself.
Yeah.
But you can do that without all that money. without all
That's
that
such a
power.
powerful. That is such a powerful statement.
And then it's very free.
And I'm happy I got that on this podcast because I haven't heard you say that on
I
any
never
other one.
said that before, and I may never say it again.
That's a great. It's true. You could do it without the money. Yet there's some sort of false belief built into us that you need to have the money.
Yeah,
and
and I think that we don't have to go overboard. That who was that? Some comedian must have said, I've been rich and I've been poor, and you can buy a lot more things if you're rich.
I'd still pick rich every day.
But it's just how much of yourself you're going to give up in order to earn that, and to recognize, again, and it sounds almost Hallmark, no disrespect to Hallmark, but still, not the most profound thoughts typically. But all we have are moments. That's it. So if you make the moment matter, it all matters. And you can make that moment matter at any age, any context, with or without any amount of money.
This is very powerful for people, I think, also that are older to hear, that start getting depressed, that they're headed towards the end of their life because they give up on the joy.
Yeah.
That they could be having in the final years for a variety of different reasons, whatever is going on.
Yeah.
But I know.
It's interesting because now, since there's so many baby boomers, the world has grayed, everybody is obsessed with living longer.
Yeah.
And, to me, I think people need to stop worrying about adding years to their lives, and they start adding life to their years, which, according to our research, will
naturally give you what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive.
But let's talk about, you're supposed to be leading here, but I'm going to take control.
Please, go right ahead.
Because I want to talk about chronic illness, because we haven't done that. Because when people are diagnosed with a chronic illness, that leads them to think there's nothing you can do about it. That's what the word chronic means. It's uncontrollable. But all the word chronic means is that the medical world hasn't yet come up with a solution, which is very different. All right. So when you have a chronic illness, you assume that your symptoms are going to stay the same or just get worse. But nothing moves in only one direction.
Yeah.
The best example is the stock market. It's going up. It doesn't go up in a straight line. It goes up, goes down a little bit. It just has to go up more than it goes down. So things are always changing, and we can take advantage of those changes to make ourselves better. So, for example, what we did in this, we do this in each of these studies with big diseases that I'll mention later, is we call people periodically. And a simple question, how is the symptom now? Is it better or worse than the last time we spoke, and why? The why question is the important one, because that does several things. First, by beginning this treatment, you feel better because you don't feel quite as helpless as you did with your chronic illness. Second, by noticing there are times it actually is better, and there are always these times. You feel better because you thought it was always optimal, maximally awful. Third, and most important, is when you ask, why now is it better? You begin a mindful search for why, and that itself is good for your health. That mindfulness is energy begetting, literally and figuratively enlivening. Fourth, I believe you're more likely to find a solution if you're looking for one.
Yes.
Okay. So we did this with people who have multiple sclerosis, arthritis, chronic pain, Parkinson's, stroke. I mean, big things.
Real things, yeah.
And in each case, find an amelioration of the symptoms. Now, when I first did this, I was looking for how to have people give themselves a placebo. Cure yourself. And you can't give yourself a placebo if the essence of a placebo is the belief that it's not a placebo. Yeah. Okay. So this was my, start into that. So here we were calling you, but now everybody has, if you don't have buy one, steal one, get it from your child, a smartphone. Set the smartphone to ring in a half hour. It rings, ask yourself, how is the symptom now? Is it better or worse than the last time, and why? Set it to ring in 2 hours and 10 minutes. Doesn't matter. Just vary the times in the course of the day, every day. And you're going to feel better just by doing something. You're going to feel better because you're being mindful. So even if nothing happens with respect to the illness, but I think there's reason to be very hopeful that, in fact, it will.
this is so powerful, especially to me, because I deal with this. I've been dealing with this since I'm 15 years old. So
Yeah.
half my life I've
Yeah.
been
Okay.
dealing
So
with this stuff.
you should try. Have you tried this yet?
I mean, thank God right now for me, my case is not as severe as other people that I know. So
but you can still make it better.
I could make it better. So I just went on the diet that I was telling you about.
Yeah,
For
so-
those watching, I went on I really shouldn't be talking about this yet because
want to see
I should
the
really
effect
wait. I should really wait
till it has a good effect.
month
Yeah.
until I have this, but the hell with it. So I started, now I'm on day 4 of the Lion diet or carnivore diet. Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, they talk about this a lot, and there's a bunch of other people that discuss this. In an effort to try to get off the medication, which is just treating the symptoms, it doesn't do anything to actually heal the actual issue at hand. And it happens to be I feel fine throughout the day for the most part. I get fatigued and tired, but I don't have pain. So how would you, let's say, apply what you're saying to myself? Like set an alarm every hour to see how I'm feeling fatigue-wise?
Sure. Well, no, you can pick the symptom. It can be fatigue. It can be pain. It can
So
be...
I'm not in pain.
No, so it doesn't have to be pain. If you have no symptoms for a disease, you have to question, do you have the disease? What does it mean?
No, I have disease, that's for
why?
sure.
Well, because you took a test that said you have it, but...
Well, no, because I'll get flare-ups. I'll be in the bathroom.
Okay, so the
a
flare-ups
million times.
then are the symptom.
Yes, but I don't always have the flare-up. So let's say
I know,
when I
but
don't have... yeah.
when do you have them and when don't you have them?
Oh, well, the way Crohn's works is if you, like, let's just say if I take the medication on time, then I won't have a flare-up. I mean, unless the medication stops working. But let's just say I've been on, let's say, Remicade now, right? I've probably been on it 5+ years, since 2019. Before I took that, I landed up in the hospital after taking something for a previous 5 years. So God willing, this should work longer. But now I've been taking it 5 years. I take it every 6 weeks. If I take it, I'm fine. About 2 months ago, my insurance didn't approve one of them. It was a whole thing. I don't know exactly what the hell happened. It's always a mess.
Yeah.
But the point is, I was late. 3 weeks late. Sure enough, week 8, boom, the flare-up started.
When the flare-up is starting, there's a particular set of circumstances
Yes.
surrounding. Do you know what those are? You know, you wake up and
Oh, yeah.
your arm hurts.
I can't
Well,
eat.
did you sleep like this? Or, you know, did you bend down to pick something under the bed? You know, cockeyed. I mean, the more of this you can notice, the more you can vary it. So let's say you have chronic stress. You think you're stressed all the time. No one is anything all the time.
Yeah.
All right. So you start doing this random, you know, asking yourself, am I stressed now? Yes or no? And you find out you're maximally stressed when you're talking to Ellen Langer. The solution is easy, right? Don't talk to me.
I doubt that's ever going to happen.
Oh, thank you, but
I might come back here again, like just
Okay.
randomly say
You're
hello.
welcome.
But yeah, no, perspective is, I remember when I was younger, I think you'll find this interesting. So my first therapist that I ever went to, which is interesting when discussing this, but the hell with it, why not? I remember I must have been like 15 or 16 and I was like complaining about something that I feel shitty about. You know, maybe it was I wasn't good at this sport or something. And he asked me, his response to me was, how many kids are in your class? So I said, well, I'm one of 30 kids in the class. He said, okay, fine. So are you better than any of the kids? So I said, well, yeah, I'm better than some of the kids. He said, okay, how many kids are you better than? So I said, I don't know, 10, 15, whatever. He's like, no, count for me. So I sat there for 5 minutes of thought. I went through it. I'm better than 26 of the kids. So he said, okay, 1 second. So there's 3 people that are better than you. You're coming in here. You have this entire perspective and this entire, narrative in your brain that you suck. You're not good. Da da da. When really you're the 4th best. You'd make the team. In a starting 5, which was just a wild perspective to me. And a lot of times people like
So my version of that is to ask you people. Do you expect to be successful 100% of the time?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you're doing. And people say no. I say, so how much of a time? And I expect to be successful, let's say 90% of the time. When was the last time you said to yourself, I must be in my 10%?
Yeah.
To recognize, to be a little easier on ourselves.
Yeah. There's such a powerful component to that. Like, I know I used to have crazy impatience. I mean, I still have impatience. I would say that's the number one thing that my number one thing I have to work on, there's probably a bunch, but I would say is my patience. And I learned, like, when something's coming up, it's always easy to see it in other people versus yourself. Like, to be as kind to yourself as you are to other people. But I always find when someone else is starting something new and they're like, I can't do this, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, it's like the 10,000 hour rule. I'm like, how long have you been doing this with? Like a week. I said, how long it takes to get good at this?
There's a whole other response to this. Okay, so You're a little kid, and if you've heard all my podcasts, I've said this before, but still bears repeating.
I probably heard it. But yes,
so
good.
you're a little kid, you're in the elevator, you're trying to press the button. You can't press it.
So
Your
powerful.
mother, father, or adult picks you up, you press it. Okay, now next time you still can't. They pick you up. Eventually, so it's great fun. Can I reach that stupid button? Eventually, you can press the button. When was the last time you were excited about being in an elevator?
Yeah.
Okay, so the point is, you can be imperfectly mindful,
by the way,
right, or perfectly mindless. So you might think, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could get a hole-in-one every time I swung the club? But no, there'd be no game there. So we have to understand, appreciate that the difficulty is part of the whole game. I mean, you don't want it to be.
Yeah.
When you want to be successful, go play tic-tac-toe against a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
You'll always win. Whatever age it is, where they don't yet know.
It makes
the
it
rule.
exciting if you could lose.
Yeah.
And when you do lose.
So I play words with friends, and I play with a number of people. But there's one person I love playing with because I almost always lose. I think that people need to understand the advantages to losing, not because then you don't have to worry about not winning, but there's something to strive for. You're learning something. Mistakes are the same sort of thing, that you can be successful, but mindless. You haven't learned anything. As soon as you make a mistake, that tells you you've been mindless, and then you have the choice to go forward differently.
Yeah.
To go forward mindfully, and the work that we've done shows that when you do that, our mindfulness leaves its imprint on the products we create.
It's really, really fascinating.
So,
okay, I know we have to go. It's getting late.
yeah, it's getting dark.
I'm enjoying this conversation a lot. That's
Yeah.
why I'm just rolling with it. I wanted to ask one last question. It's a two-pronged question. First of all, have you had a lot of critics on your work? That's one. And two, I would ask, well, it's a three-pronged question. Two, what I would ask is how you've dealt with that. And my last question, which is very, very important, because it's really the basis of this podcast, is, this whole pod is about, this whole discussion has been about labels that we apply to things. What would you say people just misunderstand about, let's say, yourself and the work you're doing?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. First, I'm sure there's criticism. They don't come to my face and tell me, so I'm oblivious, and that's fine with me. I think that I would enjoy people understanding that I'm sharing, I'm not selling. I'm telling you what my work has led me to believe, because I think there's an advantage for you to know it, and you don't accept it, that's fine. The science is real and carefully executed.
That's very powerful.
And much of, that I'm saying things that go very much against the grain in some sense. So I don't expect, if people all the while learning things by making it become second nature, and I say, you don't want to do that people are not going to instantly just stop.
Yeah.
It would be, I behoove them to think about what I'm saying and try the alternative and see where it gets you. Because again, when you're not there, if you're not growing, you're dying. And, when you're being mindless, you're not there. And the neurons aren't firing, and whatever you're doing can be done by a robot, which is one of my favorite. Well, I did this thing. I'm not sure if this is good or bad, but I'll tell you anyway, whether it'll be appreciated or not. So this was many years ago, and it was during a school vacation, and I went with some colleagues, women, to play tennis. And the gym was open, so we walk in, and the custodian comes over and says, "You're not allowed to use the court today." So I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it's vacation." I said, "Okay." I said, I'm happy to pay for the net, leave you a deposit on the net. I don't see what else we could steal here. What could go wrong? We're all insured. And so, he was adamant. And then I said to him sweetly, although it doesn't sound like it could be sweet, but I swear to you, it was sweet.
Better than me.
I said, look, if you were going to always say the exact same thing, never deviate from the rule as you understood it, your job could be done by a machine.
Whew.
And that, what you want to do is, think about it. You have 4 faculty people here ready to play.
Yeah.
What is the potential to, anyway, of course we ended up playing, or I probably wouldn't tell the story. Or I'd probably tell the story and it'd be a different, make a different point. For us to recognize that, if you're not there, you're missing out on opportunities that you're oblivious to. And if you're not there, you have no way to avert the danger not yet arisen. If you're not there, you have no choices. If you're not there, life is
such an
just not exciting.
unbelievably complex topic. Dr. Langer, I really want to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
It's my pleasure. I've
learned, forget about it in this conversation, which I've learned a ton. Between reading the book, watching all the podcasts, there's definitely a new, I'm not kidding, the last week, problems have come up. I'm like, okay, what, like right away I've thought, like what are options that could have happened? Well, what would you say? And really what I've taken away is like, I can't predict the future. So the fact that I think this is going to be bad, it does not mean it will. It could be good. So Dr. Langer, thank you so much. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Back with another great guest next week. As always, peace and love.